sweet dreams are made of this.
So this happened around 5-6 years ago. I live in Perth, Western Australia. Me and my best friend lived in the same suburb at the time. We were underage, so when it came to weekends, we usually just went exploring around parks and the quarry in our neighbourhood. It was late at night and we were just wandering the streets near our house, doing whatever we were doing. We dared ourselves to go into the quarry at night, which is pitch black and surrounded by bushland. It's a decent sized area, bigger than a football field. We chickened out at the entrance, and I decided to sit on a rock, just outside the quarry while we were chatting. So, just to give you an idea of my position, my back was facing the bushes in the quarry, and I was facing forward towards my friend talking to her. Her face suddenly went blank mid-conversation, and she just froze up for a few seconds before sprinting off and yelling at me to run after her. I had no idea what was going on, but I ended up booking it. Honestly, I thought it was some sort of human threat, like a dodgy person. We ran like 2 streets down before she managed to stop, and I couldn't get her to talk for a few minutes. She was absolutely terrified. She told me that when she was talking to me, a face appeared just to the left of my shoulder, probably around 1 meter back and coming from the bushes. She couldn't really see if there was a body, but she just described the face. She said it was just evil and had this menacing presence that she couldn't describe. I can't get her to accurately describe what she saw, but she says that it was like the features weren't defined. She says the eyes were blackened out, she thinks, and it had a grin on its face. Fucking terrifying.
I'm an Indigenous Australian, 36, female, First Nations. Due to colonisation, I'm obviously not what one would consider a full-blood. But nevertheless, I identify as Indigenous. I grew up hearing stories about yowies and hairy men. Yowies are small, meerkat-type creatures, and hairy men are what would be considered a Sasquatch-type creature. In my youth, approximately 16 years old, my cousins of similar ages and I would go and spend holidays with family in a town with a large population of Indigenous people. Not gonna lie, we were there for the boys. This one particular summer night, we'd decided to walk into town. Where our family lived was maybe 2 or 3 kilometres out of town. But the road was a highway, which was lit all the way, and had a cemented path all the way from town which ran alongside a cleared field. The grass wasn't mowed, but it wasn't what you would say was overgrown. Just at that in-between stage of being mowed a few weeks back. So, we started our trek home at about midnight this night. There was 4 of us girls, 2 in front and 2 in back. We got about 100 metres out of town when myself and my cousin, the front pair, looked up. We noticed what looked like a large man with a long black coat and hat, walking towards us, about 150 metres ahead. Now the path, like I said, was a straight shot, with streetlights the whole way along. We hadn't been drinking or smoking anything. We paused and were like, shit, who's that? Stood there debating whether or not to continue. The whole time, I didn't take my eyes off this person. As my cousins glanced back and forth during the debate, we all stopped. We stopped talking. We noticed that this man had all of a sudden turned into a type of haze or fog. Picture it like someone blurring out a person in a photograph. Like it was out of focus, but everything around was clear as day. All of a sudden, this man was now a little creature. It was hard to estimate size, but I'm thinking similar to a meerkat or a large rabbit up on its hind legs. It was looking straight in our direction. Then, after 5 or 10 seconds, it hazed over again and completely disappeared. We all saw it, and we all still talk about it to this day. I'm pretty confident that it was a yowie/little hairy man. There's different theories in the indigenous community about them. Some people believe they live under riverbeds. Some think they live inside cattle. There's also people who say they lure little kids away into the bush. It should also be said that I'm a fairly pessimistic type of person. Up until this point, I had never really had anything like this happen to me before.
The Indigenous people of Australia have up to 75 different dialects, depending on the region where they come from. So the name of this being could be called something entirely different in the other dialects, but my local tribe called it the Kardachi Man. Growing up in an outback town, you get a lot of freedom you take for granted, but that freedom could also get you in trouble, big trouble. This occurred when I was about 11 years old, in my hometown. My Aboriginal friend and I were walking around town, bored out of our brains during school holidays. The rest of our friends had gone away for the holidays. So we decided to go fishing in a secret spot down by the old Aboriginal encampment, which was about 15 kilometers out of town. We headed around to the butchery to pick up some meat for yabbies, to his house for rods and traps, and then my house for food, drinks, and a shovel. We planned to dig for worms out by the river. We got all the necessary supplies and headed out along the side of the highway. We were walking and talking and stuffing around when we finally got there. We headed down the sand road and came across a fence that blocked off the sacred land. There was a statue of some sort on the boundary, and my mate stopped and said a few words. He always said that his dad told him to do it, otherwise the bad spirits could see us. I told him that was silly and skipped it. We go down the back of the camp and walk on another kilometer or so and find our spot. All the noises of the bush were there, and there was a nice breeze blowing through the old ghost gums. We could see the fish jumping and knew we were in for a good day. We started digging around for worms and came up with a few big good ones and got to fishing. The day gets on and it turns out that we are terrible fishermen with rods, so we abandon them and get into the water to catch with our hands. Turns out I'm also terrible at that, but my mate ends up catching a decent sized yellow belly, so we keep her eating and showing off. We hadn't kept an eye on the time, and before we knew it, the sun had set. My friend starts getting really nervous, saying that it's time to get out of there and we really need to leave. I ask why, and he says that it's really unsafe to be there after dark. I laugh, and at that exact moment, there is a huge splash in the water behind us. We both shit a little bit, but with our child bravery, we check it out and can't see a thing. Just ripples on top of the water. We dismiss it as a big fish and start to pack up our stuff to leave. By the time we start our march back, It is pitch black. We can barely see our hands in front of us and forgot to pack a torch, so we kind of fumble our way through the bush until our eyes adjusted. We are walking for about 20 minutes when we stop. We can hear heavy footsteps to our left about 15 meters away. We strain our hearing and the footsteps stop. We then realize that the bush is silent. No wind, nothing. Our eyes have adjusted to the dark, so we can kind of see where we're going. And we realize we have overshot the road by about half a kilometer. And whatever was making those footsteps was between us and the road. So we decide to push on and come out along the highway further up the road. That was a mistake. The footsteps kept persisting, sometimes closer and sometimes further away. I swear at times I could hear a low mumbling. I kept saying to my friend, but he told me to shut up and don't look back. "He can't see us," was what he kept saying. So I push on, my feeling getting more and more uneasy. The next second, we hear a loud crash come from our left on the small animal trail we were on, and my mate grabs me and pulls me off into the scrub and tells me to lay down. As we're laying there, we see a silhouette loom up to the path. It kind of has the outline of feathers on it and is ungodly tall and humanoid, but sickly thin. It is going from tree to tree, not very far from us, and is looking around, snapping its head and making a low mumbling sound as it moves. It was looking for us. It keeps moving around where we were standing, and suddenly stops and stoops, looking back down the path where we hear what could have been a kangaroo jump off into the bush. The being lets out an unearthly scream that hurts our ears and shoots off down the path faster than anything I've ever seen. I looked to my mate and whispered to him if he had just seen what I had. But when I looked, he had his head in his hands the whole time. He answered, "We're not allowed to look." His cheeks were all tear-stained, and then he whispered, "I told you he would see you." We waited for what felt like 2 hours and bailed out of the bushes and ran the remaining distance to the town, losing our fish along the way and some of our stuff. We finally made it, and every time I tried to bring it up with him, he told me to shut my mouth or it would come back. So I eventually stopped trying. I haven't been able to sleep right since.
This is a story I've shared on Reddit many years ago, but I still remember it vividly. My friend and myself, we were walking home at about 3 o'clock in the morning, about 6 kilometres across a small town in New South Wales, Australia. We were coming home from one of my friend's place to another, in which I was living at the time. We were only about 1 kilometre away from home, on about a 500-metre stretch of straight road. We were walking along a sidewalk. My friend was pushing my BMX. We were just talking shit, as we usually did, when, all of a sudden, something caught my eye. 2 greyhound-looking dogs, but larger than your average dogs in height, probably twice the size. They ran out of a block of flats and jumped the brick mailboxes on the side of the footpath on the other side of the road, which stood about 3 to 4 feet high. Both of these dogs landed in the middle of the road, then ran in the opposite direction to which we were walking. As they ran further away, they grew larger and larger in size. While they grew larger, they seemed to begin to stand up on their hind legs and morph into some large muscular Bigfoot or werewolf, something like that. And in my mind, I could not comprehend what I saw. These creatures ran around the corner in the exact direction we walked from, and about 5 to 10 seconds after they turned the corner, we heard what sounded like a female child screaming. At that point, we both looked at each other, and I could tell he saw what I saw, as he was just about to haul ass and bail on me, on my bike. I said, "Fuck that," and jumped on the handlebars, and he pedalled like I've never seen before. I don't think he skipped a pedal for the whole rest of the trip home. When we got home, we locked the doors and closed the windows, and I asked him to explain exactly what he saw to me. And to no surprise, it was exactly as I had witnessed. He was an Indigenous Australian, as was his elder brother. We explained the experience to him, and he said it was probably a yowie, which I believed at the time. But this story is not typical to yowie sightings in Australia. Safe to say, this scared me to go out at night for quite a while. We told a few people about the experience afterwards, but most of the time people would laugh or joke that we were on drugs or brought up a hairy man. But I can assure the people reading this the same thing we told them. This was a completely sober experience. After the joking and carrying on, I pretty much kept this story to myself, only telling a select few people who want to hear paranormal stories, and I don't try to convince anyone if it's real or not. They can decide for themselves, but I know what I saw.
I want to share some experiences I had a few years ago. I just want to mention a few key points before I share some of the things that happened. I'm not looking for fame nor attention, and everything contained within is 100% factual. I am an Australian. These occurrences happened on the central coast of New South Wales. I am an avid outdoorsman with a keen interest and in-depth knowledge of Australian native fauna. Each of these occurrences have a witness apart from myself. I don't claim these events are paranormal, yet I am, to this day, still without a reasonable explanation. Occurrence 1. I live on the New South Wales Central Coast in an area that has houses in close proximity to Brisbane Water National Park, literally within meters from some back fences. Myself and my partner hold a keen interest which sees us venture into bushland regularly. For argument's sake, let's say we are avid bird watchers. A few weeks ago, the local fire service commenced backburning in parts of the Brisbane Water National Park over 2 or so days, which was obviously for hazard reduction. Most of the fire was directed at burning off leaf litter and dry debris, which covers the ground in an effort to reduce the chances of spot fires, which have, in the past, become large fires and threatened houses and caused neighbouring suburbs to be evacuated. Because of the way the backburning was controlled, it completely burned off the debris, and basically 90% of flora that was over 2 or so feet seemed to have survived. Even some grass plants survived, while others were completely burned, including their underground roots, which left large round circles in the substrate. This meant the canopy was fully intact. This is an important part of my story. The fire was controlled so well that the left-hand side was completely obliterated by fire, while the right-hand side was untouched. The path is about 3 to 4 feet wide at its widest points. Anyway, about 48 hours after the fire service had finished backburning, my partner and myself ventured into a large patch of Brisbane Water National Park, along a track we have walked no less than 200 times in the last 10 years. The first thing we noticed, of course, was the lack of small shrubs and ground cover, which had been replaced by a 3 to 4 centimeter layer of ash. It was also hard not to notice the smell and non-visible smokiness, which irritated our throats and noses. But by far, the most profound thing we noticed was just how quiet it was. Usually we hear birds chirping, snakes slithering into the underbush, lizards scampering out of the way, and ducks splashing around in the creek that runs along the whole length of the walking track on the right. Across the creek there are literally kilometers of bush in all directions, so it was a little odd that it was so desolate, even after the backburning. We decided to press on, even though we were pretty sure we weren't going to see any wildlife. We continued along the track for about another 20 minutes, all the while chatting about nothing in particular. Then, all of a sudden, we both jerk our heads to the left to see 2 vertical vines, which stand at about 6 foot tall and 4 centimeters or so in circumference, come towards us like they have been shook, held back, and released towards us, kind of like a slingshot. We immediately run over to the trees, 4 meters or so off the track, because we thought it may have been caused by wildlife. My first instinct was to look up, as it may have been a large bird fleeing, but there were no birds at all in any of the trees, and we would have seen or heard the wing flapping and it breaking through the canopy. It wasn't any type of goanna, as we only have 2 types which occur naturally here, and both are arboreal and will take to the nearest tree when threatened. We checked every tree, every hollow log, and any type of ground cover which survived the fire, and found nothing. It definitely wasn't any type of marsupial, because it would have been spotted when we checked the trees and surrounding ground cover. It also wasn't any type of snake, as the only arboreal snake we have locally which weighs in kilos is the diamond python, which I could spot from a mile away. We continued to walk another 3 kilometers or so along the track, and the whole time felt like we were being watched, and I was quite uneasy, but that feeling completely left as soon as we turned around and backtracked towards home. Occurrence 2 and 3. My partner and myself went out on another adventure, but this time we were looking for nocturnal animals to photograph. We went to a waterfall, which was only about 15 minutes from our house, but is rather secluded and completely dead at night and on weekdays. Funnily enough, it becomes packed on the weekends during the day in the warmer months. The layout of the waterfall is basically a large parking lot at the stop of the waterfall, which has a small park with barbecues, tables, and a small block of toilets. From the parking lot, you can also access the very top of the waterfall, which is basically a rock escarpment with water running through it. You can also access stairs that will take you down to both the middle of the waterfall, which is just a huge rock platform, and the very bottom of the waterfall. It takes about 20 minutes to walk from top to bottom. Anyway, we parked the car and grabbed my gear, which included my camera. We started making our way towards the top of the falls, which has a 2-foot barrier you have to step over to access the rock escarpment. Right as I went to put my leg over the fence, I heard the most disturbing noise I've ever heard. It sounded like a human moaning in pain, but to describe it the best I can, imagine having 10 different people with 10 different voice qualities all making the same moaning sound at the same time. I'm not one to frighten easily, but I have to admit, it sent chills up my spine. I told my partner to hurry up and get back to the car, and I locked the doors as soon as we got in and left in a hurry. Now, this place is pitch dark. There are 0 lights, and there is no way in hell you'd be there without a torch. Not to mention, you'd be able to tell if anyone was there by the cars parked in the parking lot, as this isn't a place you'd walk to. When I told a close friend of mine who also frequents the waterfall to photograph wildlife, he told me he also had an experience the night before, He had finished work late and thought he'd go for a quick walk around to see what he could find. This was in the Australian spring, when everything is out and about due to the warm and humid weather. He said he had parked his car and got about halfway down the stairs to the bottom of the falls when he came across a snake. He was photographing it when he heard the door of the toilet block being slammed repeatedly. He started running up the steps to get back to his car and said as he was running up, it sounded like something was going mental, slamming things within the toilet block. He got in his car and left. My friend and I decided to go check out the waterfall that night to see if we could find anything. We parked the car and went straight to the toilet block. We checked the block that he heard the commotion in and found a reasonable amount of blood inside the basin and a small pool on the basin soap dish. We contemplated calling the police, but weren't sure exactly what we would say. We left soon after, and neither of us visited that place for over a month afterwards. Since then, we have been back to this place multiple times without incident. Occurrence 4, the last occurrence. We headed out along the road on the central coast, which by day is rather busy due to the high number of residences and farms that are along this road. By night, it is usually very quiet with a few cars using it sporadically. So I have my high beams on 95% of the time. We drove along this road for about 40 minutes in search of marsupials to photograph. I would also like to add at this point that this road is not straight or level by any means. There are a mixture of turns as well as slight to aggressive inclines and declines along basically the entirety of this road. After driving for 40 minutes without any luck, we decided to head back along the same route we took. We were driving for about 10 to 15 minutes on our way back when we hit one of the very slight, gradual inclines along the road. When we were about halfway up the incline, I noticed something in the distance, maybe 200 to 250 meters away or so, which I initially thought was a shadow being cast from residual lighting of my high beams, when all of a sudden, it moved from the middle of the road to the right side. At this point, and while the figure was still in motion, I asked the passenger, "Can you see that?" To which they replied, "Yes, what is that?" We got to the top of the incline and on the level ground once again, and stopped in the location we saw it. I stopped and I pulled out one of my torches and surveyed where we had seen it. To my surprise, where it had crossed to was a small property which was essentially a house with a very small paddock with horses at the front. But what caught my attention was that the horses were not startled in the slightest, and could actually see one of them close to the fence eating. After about 2 minutes of surveying the area, I continued along the road and asked my passenger exactly what they had seen. They relayed exactly what I had seen, which was a tall, 6-ish foot, but with about 2.5 foot wide profile, but rounded. It was very hard to gauge an exact height because, since we were on an incline, for instance, say a person was to walk in that exact spot, we would only be able to see from the knees up due to the blind spot on the summit. My passenger added another piece of information, which was that it was rusty colored. I didn't see any color, but I have to admit that I was paying as much attention to the road as I was to the figure. And as I was traveling at approximately 70 kilometers per hour, I really had to keep my attention on the road while trying to get to the summit as quick as possible to see what it was. I would also like to add another detail which I find is rather strange. While I couldn't see the figure's complete leg area, it didn't seem to be walking in a normal fashion. It was almost like it was gliding across the road. If I had to liken the body shape to a known animal, it would definitely, without a doubt, be an orangutan, but standing a fair bit taller and not as hunched in the lower back area. So there you have it. I now live 40 minutes north of there, but I still visit often due to family there. I'd like to point out that all of the above happened within about a 6-week period, which all seemed to start with hazard reduction backboning. I've not had any weird happenings since then, and I still spend a ridiculous amount of my time out in the bush. I will not give away my profession, but I will say that I am in a scientific field that works with wildlife. A scientific field which claims animals, such as the above, are not endemic to Australia.
Okay, so this is my story. I was 15. I was at my boyfriend's house and it was about 10:30 p.m. We were sitting on his trampoline in his backyard, which faces a small park behind his house. His yard is on a ground level, about a metre, 3-ish feet, above the ground level the park is on. And his fence is on that lower level. So, by sitting on the trampoline, we could see out into the darkness of the park, which was just slightly illuminated by his yard lights. We're talking, when suddenly I feel an eerie chill, like we're being watched. Like something wants us to know we're being watched. I remember glancing all over the place and jumping at the smallest sounds of the night. Boyfriend laughing at me, before he suddenly stilled and rose up onto his knees to look at something in the park. There's a man watching us from that tree. Jesus, those words still chill me to the core. I froze and asked him to tell me what he was doing. He told me that the man was very tall, almost halfway up the tree, which was a large eucalyptus tree, and that only his head and shoulder were really visible, and that his eyes were glowing, or reflecting the light from his yard lights. I wondered if he was lying and making fun of me again for being paranoid earlier. So I sat up and leaned over him to see the thing next to the tree. And there it was. It was tall, darker than the shadows of the trees, and wasn't lit up like the trees were from the lights. Its eyes were shining brightly, and it was exceptionally tall. It couldn't be a man, if not for the shoulder and arm draped over the tree. And so it was not an animal either. I fell back onto the trampoline. My boyfriend told me to be quiet and to start moving back towards the house. It was moving towards us. I shook my head. I did not want to move. I couldn't bring myself to move. I was frozen in fear. I don't know, but I remember he had to force me up, swearing loudly and telling me that it was nearly at the fence. I got up and I caught a glance of the figure, nearly across the short distance from the trees to his yard, and I booked it up the stairs to his front door. I glanced back to look again. My boyfriend yelled not to, that it was climbing over the fence, and I somehow moved even faster and made it to the door without tripping up the stairs and breaking a leg. He told me again it had been trying to climb over the fence when I slowed down to take a look. His family is very religious, and his father swears it was a demon trying to test their faith or some bullshit. But I don't think it was. Had another encounter maybe a month later. My boyfriend told me a figure was watching me from exposed ceiling beams out of my old barn-like house during FaceTime call late at night. Maybe some kind of shadow man. Maybe an Australian version of a skinwalker. I'm 19 now, and I still can't stop thinking about what happened. If anyone knows what this sort of aggressive, stalker behaviour means, and what creature this was, please let me know. It was definitely not just some creepy man. This shadowy thing was at least 3 meters tall, 9-ish feet, and had bright, glowing white eyes.
I work at the prison where Ted Bundy was executed and was assigned on our death row wing, aka G-wing, one of the most haunted places in the prison. To give some background to working on G-wing or Golf wing, G-wing used to house death row inmates as they await their executions in the prison. It is set up similar to other wings in the prison except a little different. The wing is divided between 3 floors and 6 rows of 17 cells each row. We no longer house death row on the wing, and the first floor is the only floor with inmates housed in the cells. These inmates are open population inmates, placed on disciplinary confinement. The second floor contains 5 supermax cells. The third cell down on the right side row actually held Ted Bundy and is a supermax cell. The rest of the cells on the second floor are empty and still have TV stands. The third floor is empty as well, with regular cells. Our quarterdeck is a small 15 by 20-ish feet on the second floor where we have a desk set up and a few chairs. Bathroom and break room with a fridge and microwave. The quarterdeck is where the officers chill at, while in between rounds and activities. The staircase that goes to all 3 floors is directly to the right of the quarterdeck, next to the front door of the wing. The wing is also generally dark, and the emptiness of the wing gives the wing a dead, silent, foreboding feeling. Keep in mind, this wing is meant to hold over 100 inmates, and only usually holds 30-ish inmates on the first floor. Now that you understand the way the ex-death row wing is set up, I can go ahead with the stories. When I first started working the prison, I was told by many COs that G-wing is the easiest wing to work, due to you only having to walk the 2 rows on the first floor, making your rounds quicker and easier. However, the trade-off is that the wing is fucking creepy, with long dark empty rows, flickering lights, out-of-place noises, footsteps, doors opening on their own. This wing had it all, but everyone picked it because, after all, it's the easiest wing to work. I finally worked G-wing the first time about a month ago, and still remember the first time I've ever dealt with something just so unexplainable. I entered the wing around 6 p.m. and proceeded to do my first rounds, basically just making sure all the gates are locked. Showers, closets, pipe chasers, everything. After doing my round and everything was locked, and all my inmates were good, me and the other COs started shooting the shit. Around 9 p.m. the first weird thing happened that made us all question it, but not really freak out. We had the second floor pipe chase open on the quarterdeck, our smoke spot, and I and another unnamed CO were burning up when we heard loud clangs above us on the 3rd floor catwalk. Keep in mind, the only way for someone to go on the 3rd floor catwalk in the pipe chase would be to have the house keys to unlock that pipe chase, which were on my hip. We brushed it off as a rat and kept smoking and continued the shift. I'm unsure of the exact time this happened, but it was after 2 a.m. and before 5 a.m. Me and the other 2 COs were on the quarterdeck, talking when we were cut off by a long and loud creaking noise from the 3rd floor. We all agreed that it sounded like the row gate being opened on the 3rd. So we grabbed our flashlights and ran up the stairs, thinking that somehow an inmate from the 1st floor escaped and made it to the 3rd floor without us noticing. All of which was very improbable, but it was the only logical thing we could come up with. We arrived on the 3rd floor and immediately began checking the row gates, which were locked. And so were all the closets and cell doors. But we know we heard it. All three of us did, and we are certain it was a door or gate swinging open. We went back down to the quarterdeck and quietly talked the rest of the night. My second experience actually happened recently when I was assigned to the G-Wing again, and it genuinely shook me worse than the last experience. Now for reference, there was a cute CO assigned to the wing with myself and another CO, and me, being the absolute genius I am, decided I would impress her by going to Ted Bundy's old cell and shit-talking him while alone. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the side 2 row with the Supermax cells until I came up to the 3rd cell. The lights were already on in all the cells. I looked inside the cell, just checking it out and building up my confidence before yelling, "Ted Bundy, you a bitch." Right as the last word left my mouth, the cell light turned off and turned back on, and I felt like I was freezing. I quickly ran back to the quarterdeck and told the others what happened, and I could tell they were each trying to figure out whether or not to believe me. Needless to say, I do not mess with Bundy anymore on that wing. Those are my 2 personal stories, but any CO that has worked that wing can tell you a thing or two. Even the inmates that are housed on the wing are terrified and always silent. I remember asking them why they are so quiet, to which one who has been in G for a while stated,
"Because, sir, the police aren't the only ones we see walking down the row."
and he left it at that. Another inmate who used to be on death row and housed in Ted Bundy's old cell was hearing Ted in the cell, along with other voices, and tried telling the wing sergeant that he needed to be pulled out. The wing sergeant wouldn't pull him, so this inmate cut up his arms and passed out from how much blood he lost, and almost died, just so he wouldn't be in that specific cell. Other COs and myself also talk about feeling a sense of dread when walking down the empty rows, which I have also felt, and seen shadows move from their peripheral view. G-Wing is the easiest wing in the building to work. I would gladly work there again, but it is one creepy ass place. Hope you all enjoyed. A large part of my job is to walk around the prison I work at. I go from building to building, assisting the counselors with various things. My office is a cell on the living quarters of the inmates, so I'm used to seeing and hearing all kinds of crap every day. I went into the academic building, where the inmates can attend classes, to report to my supervisor's office and turn in some paperwork. Imagine a small school building that's only 1 floor, and basically is just a straight hallway with classrooms staggered on either side, along with some offices. Halfway down the hall is a security bubble where they check passes and supervise the area. I walk by and have a quick banter session with the COs on duty, and a co-worker, M, that informed me she was going to go work in my office because her computer wasn't working. I head down to the other end of the school, to the room I need. It's on the complete opposite end from the entrance of the building. I enter the office, closing the door behind me. It has a shatterproof window inset into it, and a similar window next to it, and say hello to the 4 women that work there. I sit at the table that is just a few feet from the doorway, facing the door, and begin to sort some papers. If you work in a prison, you'll learn to never be comfortable with your back to a door. When all of a sudden I feel weird about my sudden urge to look out the window in front of me. Like I knew something bad was going to happen. I look anyway and see a woman. She looks kind of faded and grey. I couldn't tell what she was wearing because I looked away so fast, but she had untamed, dark, frizzy curly hair and light skin. She was looking in the window at me. After looking away, I had goose flesh and felt cold sweat, but forced myself to casually look back and saw nothing. The correction centre is all male now, but has also been a women's facility and a mentally ill children's facility in the past. I've seen things before, but not in years, and not with this strong of a terrifying feeling. I'm used to being on guard all day for safety reasons, but this really threw me for a loop. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of the prison my husband and I work at. He works an hour later than I do, and today I decided to wait instead of coming back. The temperature has dropped quite a few degrees in the minutes I've been sitting out here. The sky has darkened and the wind has picked up. I go back to scrolling on my phone when I hear the sound of running footsteps on the gravel. I sit up and look around the car and the mirrors and see nothing, and the noise stops. There are some cars parked around me, but for the most part, the lot is empty. I hear it again, and it sounds as if the shoes skid as the person runs around. I then, very slightly, hear the sound of children, but only for a moment. I thoroughly check my area, and there is no one. And they always stop when I begin to look. The steps are quick and clumsy, like those of children, and this facility at one time did used to be where mentally ill children were housed. In fact, I'm sitting in front of the condemned infirmary right this very moment. I won't say the name of the prisons due to privacy reasons, but I can say that I was a CO in the state of Florida, US. I'll start with my first experience ever in the prison. It was my first week, probably my third day on the compound. We have to count inmates, and I was working a 16-hour shift. During the night shift, there's nothing to do, so we count the inmates who are locked in cells hourly. It was the 2 a.m. count, and I was in a T-dorm. T-dorms, obviously by the name, are shaped like a T. They're 2 stories, and I was on the 2nd story. The very first cell that I went up to, an older white inmate had his face against the glass. Inmates like to gun officers, masturbate to them. And I had been gunned quite a few times in the short amount of time I'd been there. Being gunned was something I didn't tolerate, so I told this inmate that he needed to be back on his bunk by the time I came back from counting the rest of the wing, or I would make sure to throw the handcuffs on him. He didn't say anything. I wrote down the cell number and continued my count. It was the first cell in the wing, so I wouldn't have forgotten which cell it was anyway. I continued my count and went back to that cell to make sure that this inmate was back on his bunk. And after shining my flashlight in the room, I counted 2 inmates. But these inmates were neither old or white. I obviously freaked out, and I told the officer in the station once I got back. This officer told me that the guy's name is Kevin, and he does that frequently. The officer that I was speaking to told me that he was actually the one who found Kevin dead after Kevin had smoked himself to death on K2, mixed with rat poison 3 months before I began the job. Prisons aren't silent places, and I have a ton of stories to share. I can't wait to share some more. At one of the prisons that I worked at, we had 3 T-dorms, which is what I mentioned in a previous post, and 4 open bay dorms. Our open bay dorms do not have any cells, and it's just lined up with bunk beds. An open bay is set up to where you walk into the front door. You have a hallway, your officer station is right in front of you, and you have wings on both sides that you're able to overlook, but they're separated. The only restroom that's available to officers is located in the hallway as soon as you walk in. No inmates have access to that hallway, obviously. Keep the bathroom location in mind. I'll come back to that. Anyway, I was working an overnight shift while covering for someone. This dorm is the dorm that holds our pedophiles. Most of them are in their 60s to 80s, and they don't really give you much of a problem, so you're usually assigned to that dorm by yourself at night. unlike our other dorms that hold offenders that are younger. Our captain makes his rounds every night and checks on each dorm. You're able to hear when someone's keys are put into your front door, and you're able to hear another person walking in the hallway. I was on hour 14 of my shift, and considering I was sitting in a dark room with no cell phone, books, or anything to do or read, I began to doze off. I heard the key in my door and woke up immediately because I knew that the captain would chew me out and potentially fire me if he found me asleep. I heard my front door open and heard footsteps coming towards my officer station. It's not a very long hallway. After about 2 minutes, I still heard walking around, and I heard the distinct jingling of keys, which, again, no inmates have access to, obviously. I looked out of my officer station window and didn't see anyone, so I walked into the hallway and knocked on the bathroom door, and there was no answer. I decided to go out and check both wings of the dorm to make sure that my captain was okay. I walked onto the left wing, and as soon as I did, I heard a toilet flush and a shower come on. I was highly confused and irritated at this point, because all of the inmates were asleep. I shined my flashlight towards the bathroom, but there was nobody inside. I walked around the bathroom for a bit to make sure no one was hiding, but again, no one. My captain also wasn't in the dorm, yet I was still hearing the jingling of keys. At this point, I was fed up and exhausted, so I decided to leave the wings and use the officer restroom. As I was in there, I heard keys and footsteps again coming from outside the door. I also heard whistling, but it wasn't heavy male footsteps or a male whistle. It was dainty footsteps, as if a female officer was in my dorm. I kept hearing it but never saw anything. When I woke the inmates up for their morning breakfast, one of them said, "Miss, you ran into Sergeant last night. She comes to visit us often. Don't pay her any mind." I let it go and walked them to the chow hall, and then I eventually asked my captain if he had been in my dorms that night. But he said he had not, because he was caught up in our max unit dealing with a more important issue. Sergeant was killed by an inmate by getting her throat slit after not providing extra toilet paper, back when this was a 100% maximum security in the 70s. She clocked in and was never able to clock out. I've worked in multiple prisons, and due to privacy reasons I won't name them. I wasn't at this prison very long, and due to the notoriety of this specific inmate, it'll give away the prison's location, but that's fine. I worked in the prison that holds Florida's death row at one point in my career, before transferring to a prison that was a lot closer to home. Due to the fact that I'm a female, they really did not want me on the row, unless it was for training. I was training, and during my training, I was given a tour of the row and the death chamber. Our death chamber is comprised of 2 rooms. One holds our gurney for lethal injection, and one holds our electric chair. I wasn't technically working on the row, but we did have an inmate who was on death watch, and there needed to be an officer in there 24/7. Death watch is where the inmate is moved to the final holding cell until their execution, where they receive their last meal and everything like that. An officer came to relieve me for a 15-minute break, and due to the size of this prison, I couldn't walk out and have a cigarette in time. I decided to explore a little bit on my break out of morbid curiosity. I walked into the room with the gurney and saw it from the window and felt my heart sink, knowing that the inmate that I was watching over would be strapped down to it in just a few hours' time. He wasn't. He ended up getting stay of execution. I ended up finding myself in the room with the chair, and when I did, something felt really off. I felt a mix of feelings: despair, anxiety. My mind was racing. I felt uneasy and turned to leave the room when I heard,
You didn't think I would be back, huh?
I felt like I was in an Arctic tundra. I began to shiver. My spine was tingling. I was frozen in fear because I knew I had entered the chamber alone. I forced myself to turn back around and had my pepper spray in hand, just in case I ran into an inmate that somehow escaped from the row. I did run into an inmate, but definitely not one that I was expecting to. I was staring dead into the face of Ted Bundy, sitting in the chair that he died in. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My heart was racing and I felt like fainting. I began to back away slowly. It was like he was alive. He wasn't see-through. The only way that I would have known that this man was an apparition was because I knew that he had been executed in the 80s. Still frozen in fear, I watched what appeared to be an alive Ted Bundy disappear, like he had never been there in the first place. I got the hell out of there and was unable to speak to anyone for the rest of the day. Three years ago, during my electrical apprenticeship, I was working for a contractor that mainly did state contractor work. The biggest job I worked on for that contractor was in an operational prison. We were remodeling some offices in the cell blocks, turning them into classroom and clerical spaces. About halfway through the project, I was working in the tunnels under the cell blocks. If memory serves me, I was building a conduit run to power a panel in the cell block above. I was in a utility room with my back to the door, working. I turned around to get something from my cart and noticed the door was closed. The doors in the tunnel were all thick, heavy steel doors that scraped the concrete when you open or close them. This particular door was warped and only opened about 2 feet. Funny thing is, I did not hear the door move. In my mind, I'm thinking the guard that shadows us while we are inside was messing with me. So I opened the door with the expected screeching of metal and concrete. I looked around and I saw the guard about 100 yards back towards the entrance to the tunnel. This particular guard was a heavy-set older gentleman, very likable, very out of shape. So I walked down to where he was sitting, feet straight with ankles crossed, snoring. I approached him and asked him if he was messing with me. He denied it, saying he was asleep the whole time. The man was not in any kind of shape to quietly close a dragging steel door, then sprint 100 yards without being winded and breathing heavy. So I believed him and went back to work. Back in my little workspace, I get wise and work with all my stuff inside. And I only had my back to the door for a limited time. A few minutes after I resumed what I was doing, I was standing by my cart, facing the door, when the door slammed shut with enough force for me to feel wind. This time the door screeched and slammed quite loud. It was loud enough that the guard came down to check it out. I have heard plenty of ghost stories during my time in the prison, and I'm quite happy that I had a personal experience there. I finally have a little time to post some more of my experiences working in a prison. Same prison from my previous story, a little before that one happened. I was down in that same tunnel, working in a crawl space. I was hanging brackets to support conduit that we were going to use to feed a panel we were going to hang in the cell block above. There wasn't anything really that stands out about these crawl spaces. None of them felt really sinister or anything. They were raised up off the ground, thankfully. When it rains, the tunnels tend to get a lot of water. They were concrete floored and about 3 feet tall. Tore up my knees crawling around in them. I had done work in a few of these crawl spaces before this one. I think it was cell block B. All the cell blocks were alphabetical. This particular crawl space had a light, but it did not work. hard hat headlamps were crucial in the tunnel. So I'm in this crawl space, working. I only had 1 or 2 supports mounted. I'm hammer drilling holes for anchor points, and I get this sudden feeling of being watched. I turn around and look towards the opening, thinking the guard or my partner were looking in on my work. But no one was there. Back to work I go. I got the bracket mounted up and I felt that feeling again. This time, I feel the gaze from a dark corner, far to the opposite side of the space. I never heard anyone come into the space, but I knew someone was in that corner. I turned my head to look in that direction, and my ladder yelled from outside it's lunchtime. I kinda hauled it out of there, but as I stepped out onto the ladder to exit, I looked into that corner. The only thing there was what looked like an old rag. We did work in cell blocks from A to H, and I only felt that kind of direct attention in a crawl space twice. Both times it was very similar, except in the second crawl space, there was nothing else visible in the space with me. Got to get myself to work. I'll post more later. Because these stories are so short, I'll post them both here this morning. These 2 stories also take place down in the tunnels. The first experience I actually ever had down in the tunnels started off with a conversation. As I remember it, we, me, my tool partner, and 2 guards, had just entered the tunnel, and the guards were explaining the procedures in the tunnel. How we were only supposed to have 2 of the doors down there open at once. How we can have the crash gate unlocked, but it has to stay closed. A crash gate is a gate that splits the tunnel in half in case of riots. Another gate mirrors the tunnel gate in the cell blocks above it. And also, how 1 guard would have to remain in the tunnel until we left for the day. The whole time the guards were speaking to us, I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my left eye, like a pacing, back and forth, in front of a light. It was blocking the light, which I think is why I noticed it. I must have had a puzzled look on my face, because my guard asked me if I had a question. We both had 1 guard assigned to us personally, because we would be split up so often, 1 above and 1 in the tunnel. Well, I guess I did, and I asked if anyone else noticed the person pacing at the end of the tunnel. The guard kinda looked at me funny. Not like he thought I was crazy, more like a knowing look. My tool partner did, however, call me crazy, and we went on with the day with no other incidents. A few weeks later, but still before my first story, and really close to the same time as my second story, maybe days away from the crawl space incidents, we were a little further down the tunnel. I want to say we were right by the gates because the photo I took was taken from beside the gate. We were having a bull lesson before we got to work. Once again, I was seeing the pacing man, but this time I didn't mention it. I watched the guard's eyes. I noticed he kept firing glances at that direction. Then, he suddenly and quickly turned his head towards it, which made me look as well. About halfway between us and where we saw the pacing man was a stack of boxes. There, leaning out from behind those boxes, we saw a man in a brown prison uniform. We kind of looked at each other, and the guard went into action. I grabbed a pipe bender and followed. I had to provide backup, not because of a rule, but because we were supposed to be alone down there. We walked down to where we saw the figure and found nothing. This is when I noticed that where we saw the pacing man was a ramp that goes down to another gate which I was told leads to the main road and is the entrance point for the utilities. The light was about 6 feet off the ground above the gate. I walked over for a closer inspection and noticed a 1/2-inch water line was jumping, like someone was shaking it. I wrote that off as a mouse or a giant roach. I swear I saw one carrying a dead frog down there. This is when my guard told me of his own personal experiences, which are my next 2 stories. Everything else that happened were either explainable or just feelings of rage or sorrow. Things would be moved, but we figured the guards were having fun. Time for work. Until next time. So I've been laying here in my bed scratching at my wall to mess with one of my roommates. And suddenly I felt like this is the perfect time to relay one of the stories my prison guard escort told me, shortly after we both saw what we thought was a man lean out from behind some boxes in the tunnel of prison. I have no reason to think this story is made up, but I cannot confirm any details of this or the next story. I will tell this story in the first person to save a little typing, but these are his words, not mine. I used to work night shift when I first started here in the prison. I always signed up for but never got the rover job. Rover is a guard that sits in the guard shack and makes rounds twice a shift to check every door and every gate to ensure they are locked, and checks the perimeter fences to make sure they have not been tampered with. One night I finally got what I thought was going to be the easiest shift I had ever done. I landed the rover job. During that shift, my first trip around the perimeter and gates went just fine. Everything was as it should be. However, my second round was a little different. I was patrolling the tunnel access points, checking the gates and doors as I had done earlier that day. In the tunnel, there are 3 books that the rover must sign to prove they made their appointed rounds. I had books A and B signed. I just had book C to go. Book C lay down a long and dark corridor. Picture a long hallway with one bare bulb lighting up a patch of the path every 20 or 30 feet. I entered the hallway and closed and locked the gate behind me. As I started to walk towards the bookend of the hall, I heard footsteps behind me. I hurried to the first patch of light and looked behind me. No one there. When I stopped, so did the accompanying footsteps, so I wrote it off as an echo. I continued on, and as soon as I exited the patch of light, the footsteps returned, this time just a little faster, almost like it was trying to catch up. Once again, in the next patch of light, I stopped and looked for my pursuer, and again saw nothing, and the steps stopped. I turned and looked towards book C. It's 2 more patches of light away. It actually was in a 3rd patch by itself, like a beacon of safety. I'm starting to get a little nervous about now, so I pull out my flashlight and shine it around. My light illuminates nothing but the damp walls of this part of the tunnel, so I keep on walking. As soon as I left that patch of light, I hear those steps again, only this time it sounds like they are jogging towards me. I quickly spin around and shine my light towards the sound, and once again, see nothing. I decided now is not the time to mess around, so I ran to the last light and the book, so I can get the hell out of this tunnel. As I reached the book, I could hear the steps sprinting towards me. I quickly signed my name in the book, and as I wrote down the time, I heard a heavy sigh behind me, and right in my ear, a husky voice whispered my name. I slowly turned my head towards the sigh. Seeing nothing, I sprinted out of there, stopping only long enough to lock the doors behind me. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I can still feel the breath on my ear from when it whispered my name. I put in for a shift change right away, and never signed up for rover duty again. This happened almost 8 years ago. I live in the northern part of Mexico, I went to put my dog, a Siberian Husky, to my front yard at 3 a.m. I was also checking my cell phone on a bench next to him. Suddenly I see a kid with a cane outside the fence walking up to us, like 4 foot distance from me and my dog. My dog starts barking. The kid screams when he sees my dog, and immediately asks me if it was a wolf, which I answer without looking at him directly, saying, "No, it's a husky." I felt so confused, like, what is a kid doing outside at 3 a.m? And why does he have a cane? I assumed he was blind or something because he seemed to have black sunglasses. But this was really odd, so I started to feel danger all over me, and for some reason I never looked at him directly. I started ignoring him, keeping my eyes on my cell phone. He then does the weirdest scream ever. It sounded like some kind of malfunctioning computer or machine. As he screamed, I saw in the street a bright light. It was a truck speeding up like crazy. It looked like some of those old Chevy pickups. The truck passes by and the screaming stops. The child just disappears into thin air before me. I reacted and quickly opened the fence to check outside and could not see any trace of the kid or that truck. It's worth mentioning that he was wearing old clothes, like from another period of time. The brief conversation was in Spanish, and I never saw him directly in the eyes or face. Looking from the corner of my eye, I was sure he was wearing some kind of black sunglasses. After investigating on the net, I came to the conclusion that they were most likely his eyes. I never heard of black-eyed children before this happened to me. I'm telling this story here for the first time. The only other people who know about this are my immediate family members. I know it sounds completely fabricated and I have no way to prove any of it. But it happened. I'll do my best. I'm originally from Ireland. I moved to the States roughly 20 years back. This story takes place in County Clare, Ireland, when I was about 15 years old. One afternoon I was walking through the woods near my home. I was alone. I was alone in my youth and would often stroll the woods until I found a tree to sit beneath and write. Writing has always been my hobby. My point is, I was very familiar with these woods. I felt safe there. On this particular day, I was walking a path to a specific tree that was my favorite to sit beneath. The sound of the woods were all around me. There was a gentle breeze, and while I couldn't see the birds, I could hear them. It was comforting. And then it all stopped. Everything became unnaturally still. The air was still. The birds stopped twittering. I no longer heard a single thing. I'd never experienced this before. It was as if I had suddenly become deaf. There was just nothing. No sound, no movement, no breeze. At this point, I had started to become anxious. I wasn't yet afraid, but I started home anyway. The feeling in the woods was not what I was used to. I was no longer comforted, so I decided to go home. It was then that I saw movement from the corner of my eye. Nothing I could pinpoint, but a dark shape that was just there. And then it wasn't. Everything else was still that eerie calm. I started to walk faster. And then the black shape again, this time on my other side. Now I was afraid. I began to run. I still heard nothing but was sure something was chasing me. When I reached my home, I ran inside and slammed the door, fully expecting my mum to yell at me for slamming. But she wasn't there. In fact, nobody was home. That was a bit odd, but not unheard of. Finally, gaining some sanity, I decided I needed tea. Now. So I began to boil the water for tea. And then, there was a knock at the door. I jumped. My heart rose to my throat. Nobody knocked in these parts. It was a small village where everyone knew everyone else. Everyone was family. There was no knocking. There was a friendly, "Oi there," and then people came in. So a knock was strange. I crept over to the glass in the window and peeked out. I noticed two things right away that terrified and confused me. The first was a child, a girl of maybe 10 or 12, looking not at me but at her feet. The second thing scared me to my toes. It was getting dark. How was that possible? I had left to go on my walk in midday. The sun had been fully out and I had been gone no longer than 40 minutes. How then was it dark? I looked at the clock. It was almost 7. How? How had I misplaced 5 hours? The knock came again, and I jumped again. I didn't open the door. I called out, "Oi there, can I help you?" The girl didn't look up. She said,
I need to come in. Please let me in.
She had no accent. She wasn't Irish. There was no lilt in her voice. She sounded American. I called out again, "I can't let you in, but I'll ring someone if you need help." The child still didn't look up. She said,
No, that won't work. I need to come in.
At this point, I had had enough of the strange, scary child. She was freaking me out. I wanted my mum. I wanted my dad. I wanted to know where 5 hours of my life had gone. And I was so frightened at this point that not even tea was going to help. So I did what any teenage girl would do when faced with a situation such as this. I screamed and ran to my bed, covered myself with my blanket and waited for my mum to come home. This was pre-cellular phones and I was not going to risk going to the kitchen to phone someone. Plus, I had no idea who I would call. The girl was still knocking on the door, but she never moved to a window or to the back door. She stayed at the front door. After a while, I got my nerve up to go check again. It had been silent for a bit. I went to the door and looked out the glass. The girl was still there, but she was no longer at the door. She was sitting on the fence. She was no longer looking down. She was looking right at me. In the fading light, it looked like her eyes were pitch black. I screamed again and ran back to the safety of my blanket. Eventually, my mum came home. I told her what happened. She decided that it was my overactive imagination, but she did call down to the shops and the pub to find out if anyone in town had American family visiting or if anyone knew who the girl was. Nobody did. My grandmother told me I had survived an encounter with the Fae, and that I was lucky. She was the only one who ever believed me. I never saw the girl again. I never had missing time again. I never felt the absolute stillness in the woods again. After I moved to the States, and years later I heard of black-eyed children. My stories seem to coincide with that, but that's ridiculous, right? I still have no explanation. Demon? Fairy? Ghost? Black-eyed child? I don't know. But it happened. I swear to that. I'm a believer in many things paranormal, with BEKs being one of the stories I thought was an urban legend until early this morning. I'm the assistant manager of the Pizza Hut in my town, and my GM has me on the late night shift so he doesn't have to anymore. It was a little after 2 a.m, and around that time is when the external lights of the building cut off, leaving the parking lot almost pitch black. The driver and I were in the very back of the store finishing up dough prep and dishes as we normally do. I like to say that I am attuned to the paranormal since I have witnessed many things throughout my 21 years of existing on this planet. While we were in a conversation about sales and what to prep, I started to feel unnerved. I ignored it due to anxiety and stressing over a homeless man making a scene a couple of hours prior to close. But the feeling didn't go away, so I made a patrol around the restaurant. I looked at the front doors first, since the highway gives our front door a little bit of light, but there was nothing. I looked out the windows in the dining room, but still nothing. It wasn't until I decided to look out the drive-through window that I saw it. Standing about 3-ish yards away from the window was a girl in a dress, barely illuminated by the lights that were still cooling down outside. She was pale and had hair that fell just past her shoulders. As an adult, my first thought was, what is that kid doing out in the pouring rain? But then our eyes met, and I saw that hers were a jet black car. I recoiled from the window and ran over to the safe to get my phone out of it. We have to keep our phones locked up during business hours, and I don't have to have my phone glued to me 24/7, so I normally just leave it in there until I need it. By the time I got it out and ran back to the drive-thru, she wasn't there, and I didn't see her again for the entire time we were there. I know the stories say they come to the doors of homes and try to get in, and as long as you don't invite them in, you're fine. But she just stood there and then vanished. I'm still on edge from the whole situation. The believer of the paranormal in me also makes me wonder if it could have been a spirit, which scares me more. My girlfriend thinks I'm crazy, and my general manager, who also believes in things such as this, is now freaking out. About 6 months ago or so, in South Texas, I was visiting family in a decently sized RV park in a rundown side of town. It was maybe 10 p.m. or so at the time, and the dog had to go out. My dog only does his business at the end of the street, on a buddy of mine's lawn, and has issues passing due to a tumor on his back end, so I always stop at the end of the street and kind of watch the stars and stuff. Well, I looked down the street near the entrance to the park, and under this lonesome streetlight, I saw a silhouette of a child, maybe 9 to 10, just standing there, almost in a T-pose, but not quite. The odd thing I noticed was the hands, which were open enough where it was crab-like in the sense that you could see the thumb, and fingers had zero movement. I was puzzled, trying to find out how this figure was so dark under the streetlight, though it was literally like seeing someone, just enough to make out the outline in darkness. Zero light was reflected on this kid, just utter darkness. The only thing I could think was that someone was pulling a random prank, and actually put a cutout or mannequin, even in the middle of the road, but again, was still confused how it remained so pitch black, directly under a source of light. I didn't walk up to it because of 2 reasons. One, being my dog was still straining trying to go potty. And 2, I have a keen sense of picking up on negative energy. It was the same vibe I felt in the haunted house I grew up in, where I also had several spiritual encounters. I sat there staring for more than a few minutes, just focusing on fine points of this silhouette, looking for the slightest flinch of movement, but never saw it. It was at this time I figured I'd pull my phone out and try to zoom up on this figure. But my screen in camera mode was pitch black, so I couldn't make anything out. And when I did zoom into where I surely thought the figure was, I saw nothing but the streetlight through the lens. A couple actually began to walk behind this kid around this time, and I noticed they didn't even glance or acknowledge this kid standing maybe 6 feet or less from them as they walked by. And what was super weird was, as they passed under the same streetlight, you could make out everything from facial features down to what clothes they were wearing, but the kid remained solid black. They were walking their dog, and even the dog didn't seem to notice, which is odd reflecting upon this now. I gave up and glanced down to put my phone in my pocket, and when I looked up, the figure was gone. It just vanished in that second or two of looking away. At this point, I was getting really confused and just wanting to get home. The creepy factor was through the roof. I turned around and began to walk back when, all of a sudden, fast-paced running was coming up behind me. Startled but trying to keep my composure, I quickly turned around and saw this grey blur just zoom past. The thing that stuck out the most was for sure the very grey skin and what I swear was black eyes from just the slight bit of eye contact I had. Then right as this kid is passing, he says, "Ha, I scared you." And boom, dude's gone just like that. Poof. By the time I got home, I began researching what this area has as far as legends, and stumbled across black-eyed kids. I guess Texas is very aware of black-eyed kids, and has several sightings starting from some dude in Abilene who was a reporter. It wasn't until I put some work in and did further research and talked with other Redditors before I became totally convinced that this had to have been a black-eyed kid encounter. It's 11:30 at night, in the middle of June, and I'm in my house alone with my dog. I was reading a Reddit post about BEKs, and was pretty shook already. I've heard rumors that, if you know about them, they come and visit you. I was sitting on my living room couch when I hear 2 knocks at the front door. My dog immediately hopped up on the couch with me, and started trembling. I got startled, and hesitantly walked to the front door. My door has 2 slim windows on each side of it, so I looked out through the right window and saw 2 kids. One looked really small, like he was 5, and the other kid looked at least 9. They were both wearing winter jackets. Keep in mind that it's the middle of June. I tried to look at their faces, but my porch light wasn't working for some reason. They were just staring at the door. I was staring at them for at least 20 seconds when they both look at me through the window on the door. I run back to my couch and try to be as quiet as I can and don't make any noise. I hear 2 knocks again and hear, "Sir, let us in. Me and my brother are very hungry and tired." I just about scream because I have no idea how they know I am a man. I waited 10 seconds, then I hear, "Let us in. We have to call our mum." I waited about a minute and I hear pounding on my window and one of the kids say, "Let us in a demanding manner. It has been at least 2 minutes and I think they are gone until I hear my backyard gate sling open. I then hear pounding on my backsliding door. I run upstairs and lock myself in my bedroom with my dog. They keep pounding for at least a half hour. The pounding stopped and I put headphones on and tried to sleep. I never saw them since. This happened a couple of weeks ago when myself and 2 of my partners, who will be referred to as K and W, decided on visiting this 150-year-old graveyard at night. Now, I'm a sensitive or empath or whatever. W and K are blocked off energy-wise. The walk in the cemetery was dark and peaceful at first. We wandered a while and read some stones, and eventually at a crossroads, K noticed something and walked off. He came back and whispered, "There's someone over there. I'm going to check it out." The moment he walked away again, I felt eyes watching me from everywhere, an overwhelming primal sense of fear. I froze, and W strained to see what K was looking at. About 7 or 8 minutes later, K was back and looking spooked. He told me that there was a stone-white figure darting through the trees. I was asked if I wanted to leave, and I said no. So we stayed and wandered a little more. After a little longer, we came across this huge marble mausoleum, the door of which was made of glass, and you could see through it. Getting closer set me off. Everything felt wrong, and the dread was back. There was an extremely prickly feeling all over my skin. Kay touched the door and felt it too. Both Kay and myself saw a shadow moving around inside the mausoleum as we stood there, and the moment he touched the door, the shadow disappeared. We ran, eventually finding a place to sit for a moment. I was completely overwhelmed and continuing to feel like we were being watched. Kay was really freaked out, getting dizzy and very quiet. He seemed really off, like he'd seen something I hadn't. I was asked again if I wanted to leave, and this time I said yes. We left, and the whole walk home, myself and Kay felt the dread again. That inhuman, primal fear. Once we got home, W immediately fell asleep on the couch while Kay and I began to panic. Both of us felt extremely dizzy and weak. And then, knocking. It started slowly, only 3. As time went on, it got more and more frantic sounding, but not much harder. We couldn't shake the dread for a good 30 or so minutes. When the dread left, we were left drained mentally and physically, and decided on going upstairs and attempting to get some sleep. We assured each other that if it was a black-eyed kid, that we didn't open the door, thus we are safe. At some point while watching TV to try and calm down, I got overheated and Kay opened the door to the upstairs patio and turned on the fan. That was another thing we did wrong. Around 3:20 a.m, Kay woke up and he remembers only being able to move his head around. The door had opened on its own about halfway, and a child who looked about 12 with extremely messy shortish hair and face covered by a shadow was standing there and staring. He remembers the most intense terror he's ever felt, so much that it physically hurt. He shut his eyes and held them closed until the terror passed and he fell back asleep. The house was already haunted, different story, but the activity has been kicked up a notch or two. The cat goes nuts because of it. Since then, for both me and Kay, depression and anxiety has become much more intense than it has been in a very long time. I can't sleep at night, and neither can Kay. There has been a constant dull ringing in my ears. Occasionally dread so bad it hurts will take over Kay for 20 to 30 minutes. And I've been having random pains in various parts of my abdomen. TVs, radios, and lights turn on and off by themselves, and we are both constantly feeling watched and intense fear. I can't find any sources on how to deal with or get rid of black-eyed kids. I also practice witchcraft and nothing I've done, casting circles, salt, cleanings, etc., has worked. Whatever black-eyed kids are, whatever they want, is having effects on our physical and mental health. I feel so drained. Someone, tell me what to do, please. Growing up, I absolutely hated being home. At night it always sounded like someone's walking around, and there were whispers from my closet whenever it was left open. I always made sure it was closed, but most mornings it would be partially open. I would refuse to go into the basement, even during the day, and you could never escape the feeling of someone or something watching you. I'm talking full-on blankets over the head, nose poking out type of childhood. One night in the summer, we had a powerful thunderstorm roll through. I remember it vividly because the lightning was near constant, and instead of white and blue, the colours were more purple and green. The storm took out the power. My father asked me to go to the kitchen and help get the candles and flashlights. I was walking down the dark hallway when something jumped out from the bathroom. The kitchen door was 5 feet behind it. Thinking it was my dad trying to scare me, I laughed and said, "Nice try." There was a loud growl, and my father put his hand on my shoulder from behind me. He pulled me back into the living room, closed and locked the door, while saying that it wasn't him, and he saw it too. The growling continued from the kitchen entryway for a good 10 minutes, and it sounded like something was pacing the hallway. Dad and I spent the night in the living room. We didn't sleep. We just watched the door. We moved a few months later. The house we moved to felt good. It had no issues with feeling watched or hearing things. Felt like I could sleep without the blankets over my head. Years later, when my father was diagnosed with cancer, we started watching the ghost shows on cable. That got us talking about that night and what we saw. It was then my father revealed that the house I grew up in was an old, renovated funeral home. The way the house was renovated, my closet was the mechanical room for the lift to bring the bodies from the basement embalming room to the viewing room on the first floor. Our floor was the funeral director's private living space. My father's aunt actually owned the house and lived on the first floor, which was the floor where they would have the viewings and such. The house has changed hands to cousins of mine. Talking with them, they said they had similar experiences, scratching on the wall, footsteps, banging on the basement bulkhead, and lights that would come on dimly, as if they were connected in series, rather than each light being its own circuit. They even told me they won't go into the basement alone because the stairs go down past a walk-in storage room with no lights, and they swore they hear breathing or growling when they went past. They have since moved from that house also. A few folks wanted to know if I had any more experiences growing up in what I would later find out was an old funeral home. Why yes I do. We lived there for 13 years, 1977 to 1990. It wasn't until after the incident during the storm in 1990 that my father decided it was time to move. I made note of every experience we had, individually and as a family, in a journal. I'll go room by room. Every room in common. Cold spots, odd smells were common throughout the house. We attributed that to the old steam radiator heaters. Scratching on walls at night. No rats or vermin. No insect activity or plumbing issues. Dad was a maintenance foreman. He checked everything out. Also of note, there are no trees close enough to the house. You always felt like you were being watched. None of my friends ever stayed over or wanted to come inside the house. They always said the house creeped them out. Now, on to the experiences by specific room. Entryway. The interior door of the entryway was wood with glass panes. This opened to a stairwell that leads down to the main floor. The entryway door was always locked at night. The door had an old hook and latch style door closure with a thumb button to operate it. It was very secure, but on many occasions my father would find the door slightly open or completely open when he got up. Sometimes, if it was early enough in the night, you could hear the click from the latch. The hallway runner would always be bunched up, even though the door cleared it easily. Bathroom. This is the room that the thing jumped out into the hallway during the storm. You never entered the bathroom in the dark. Almost the entire back of the door was covered by a mirror. Anyone closing the bathroom door always covered the mirror because it never felt right. You could see shadows move in the reflection, but not when you turned to see behind you. We couldn't take the mirror down as it had been basically painted into place. The thought of busting the mirror always made you feel nauseous and sick. The kitchen. Cabinets would open and close. The bell for the toaster would ding at odd times, even if the toaster was off or unplugged. Dining room. The main light over the table would turn on dimly red at odd times. The bulb was a bright white incandescent. At night, you could hear the old push-button switch get pushed because the click was so loud. Pantry. This room always skeeved me out. The room was like a walk-in closet for dry goods and the like. As soon as you entered, you felt like bugs were crawling all over you. But there was never a bug in sight. No spiders, nothing. Also, you made your selection quickly because you also always felt like something was going to drop on you from above. Very unsettling. sun porch/sunroom. For Christmas one year, my father got me a Fonzie from Happy Days pinball machine. It was kept unplugged when not in use. On a few occasions, you could hear the chunk of the flippers, or the sound of a ball rolling down the game field. Dad thought the game was malfunctioning, but it wasn't. There was also an electronic bowling lane. The ball would roll around the room at night sometimes, and the game played music if you got a strike, right of the Valkyries. The music would sound at odd times, and off speed. This is also where the attic access was. Attic. Now, the cool thing about the attic was that the former funeral director had a full bar and billiard table in the attic, along with a spare guest room. How he got that stuff up there is a mystery because the attic entryway was super narrow. Oddly, the attic was calm. I remember a wood carving just past the door that depicted Ireland, and etched into the wood was Erin, Ireland. Protect those that cross this threshold. That's basically what it said. My grandfather could read Gaelic and translated the meaning. When we moved, we took the wood carving with us, with permission. I'm only the third generation in the family who wasn't born in Ireland. My dad hung it on the front door of our new house.
April 1986. It's morning and I couldn't be happier. Last night was scary. I woke up and it was still very dark. I heard scratching from my closet. I got up and turned on my room light to make sure my hamster didn't escape. She didn't. She is still in her cage. I checked the closet and it was closed. Turned off the light and went back to bed. I tried to get back to sleep, but I kept hearing noises. It sounded like my closet latch. I think it was being lifted up. I heard it click. After the latch clicked, it felt like something was in the room with me. I felt like I was being watched. I covered my head with my blankets. I heard something moving in my room. My hamster was quiet. She wasn't running in her wheel tonight, or biting her water dispenser. I thought something might have harmed her, but she's okay. I hoped my mum and dad would be checking my window, but it's not summer and the windows are closed. The sound was in my room and moving around. It was near my toy box, not my window. My toy box is at the foot of my bed. I heard a G.I. Joe fall over. I'm not alone. My dad woke up to get ready for work, so that means it was 4. He always farts or sneezes first thing. That's how I know it's him in the hallway. I'm alone in my room now. I was able to sleep once I heard Dad moving in the house. I told my dad when he got home from work what happened in the night and early hours of the morning. Dad opened my closet to show me it was just stuff. It was very cold in the closet. He thinks I might have dreamed it. Mum does too. Could I have? No. My closet door was not latched and slightly open this morning. Even now, with the sun up, and as I'm writing this, something is watching me from the closet. I know I closed it before bedtime. There's also a rip in my Transformers sleeping bag at my feet. End of entry. May 1986. Early evening. I helped my dad cut the grass today. After that, we had to put away the tools and equipment. Unfortunately, these have to go back into the basement. I really hate the basement. It doesn't feel right, which means I get goosebumps. It smelled stuffy and heavy, like moss and very old pennies. I was helping to put away the grass catcher when Dad asked me if I saw something move along the tool wall. I think he was trying to tease me because I was really jumpy about being so far into the basement. What I didn't want to tell him was that I did see something move along that wall. It moved to the corner, then moved up the wall, and then it was gone. The worst part of the basement was the storage area by the stairs. It's really dark and there's no light to turn on. I won't go in there, ever. I won't even shine a light in that room, because I have nightmares about that creepy room sometimes. And in them, the floor is blood-stained. I also believe that whatever has been up to my closet at night comes up from this storage room of the basement. I stay as far away from the opening as possible, because also in my nightmares, there is something in there that will pull me in if I get too close. We finish putting all the tools away, and my dad always has me go before him, because the old wooden stairs are loose. We make it out of the basement, and my dad padlocks the door. We share a key with Aunt G and Uncle J. We usually run into Uncle J after cutting the grass. He's a nice guy, and likes to make models. He has always warned me about going into the basement alone. I always took him seriously. Dad would say that Uncle J was trying to spook me. Anyway, I'm excited because Mum is making casserole for dinner tonight. Late evening. Mum asked me to help make the casserole, and asked me to get the mac and cheese and soup from the pantry. I don't like the pantry either. It reminds me too much of my closet. I really want the casserole, so I go into the pantry and try and pull the light cord, but I couldn't find it. I think something touched my hand and I jumped back quick and closed the pantry door. I'm trying to calm down when my mum says, "It's just my imagination." I tried again and found the light cord. The light goes on and I gather the stuff. I think it's odd that I can smell the basement in the pantry. And just then, along the back of the pantry wall, I see a large grey pile of what I think are worms, wiggling like the night crawlers I helped Dad get for fishing. I drop the stuff to the floor and step back. My mother comes over and I point, and my mother must have seen it too because she let out a gasp and chucked the soup can at it. She then closed the door and called for my dad. Mum said she thinks she saw a squirrel or something in the pantry. Dad had a look. No squirrel. Also no hole in the wall. No nothing. I helped my mum make the casserole. We both kept an eye on the pantry door while cooking. Mum told me that maybe we were both having imaginary issues. Late evening. As I'm writing this, I'm in my bedroom, burping casserole. I'm a bit worried about tonight as I was in the basement today and it likely saw me. I know what that means for tonight. May 1986. Next morning. I woke up and it was morning. I guess helping Dad cut the lawn and that must have helped me sleep through the night. I hear my parents talking in the kitchen. Mum was asking Dad if he could figure out why all the kitchen cabinets were wide open. I heard them talking about maybe the house settling, or maybe I didn't close them tight after helping with dinner cleanup. At the close them tight part, I looked over at my closet, which was again partially open, and the hairs on my arm stood up. I jumped at the sound of 3 knocks on my bedroom door. I looked over expecting to see one or both of my parents, but no one was there. I then heard 3 knocks from the closet door, and I bolted from my bed, kicked, the closet door closed, and I went right to my parents, knowing I couldn't explain that I made sure the closets, and my closet for that matter, were closed. End entry. June 1986. Afternoon. My parents got me the D&D Red Box. I'm really excited because I got a chance to play in summer camp last year, and it was really fun. My therapist said I needed something to focus my imagination on, to give me an outlet. I'm not sure why I need a wall plug, but he's a doctor. My cousin, 3 years younger than me, is coming over today for the weekend. I will let him know about what goes on at night here. No one seems to believe me when I tell them the things that I have seen, except my Uncle Jay. Evening, my room. My cousin will be here until Sunday. We spent a bunch of time reading the D&D rulebooks. My cousin wanted to tell scary stories. I told him, if we are unlucky, we will be in one, and I explained what I had been seeing lately. He laughed it off, but requested we use a nightlight. Night, my room. My parents had gone to bed and my cousin and I had just finished going over the rulebooks, colouring in the dice numbers, and trying to make our first characters. We lost track of time and soon discovered that it was almost 1:15 in the morning. We decided it was time to turn in. I checked the closet. It was closed and latched. We had sleeping bags on the floor, Transformers for me, a Spider-Man for the cuz. We continued to goof off a bit when the room got very cold, like a window got opened. Just as my cousin went brr, we both heard a loud click. We both peered over the top of the bed and saw the closet was no longer closed completely. We also noticed the nightlight was getting dimmer and the room darker. Suddenly the room went pitch black as the nightlight went completely out. There are 2 large windows in my room, but there was not even any moonlight coming in. When the nightlight came back on, the closet was more open, and we both saw something dark in the corner near to a window. The nightlight went out again. The room got dark except for the moonlight coming in the window this time. The moonlight was broken by what looked like a set of 3-fingered hands reaching into it. Grabbing our sleeping bags, we ran to the living room, clicked on all the lights, and camped as close as we could to my parents' room. My hamster's cage was moved to the dining room because I told my parents that maybe that was the noise I would hear at night, and that's what was waking me up. She had been in her exercise wheel. When my cousin and I ran from my room, I remember hearing the sound of her running the tube to get to her nest area. Then the house was silent. Silent until my dad tripped over my cousin. He was about to chew us out for making noise so late, or early. But a door slammed in my room, and he went to check it out. We camped out in the living room. When my dad came back, he said he will fix the closet latch and that we shouldn't be reading monster books up so late at night, sliding the red box to me. Oddly enough, he said, we will spend the rest of the weekend at my grandmother's house. My cousin vowed to never spend the night at my house again. June 1986. Entryway. Dad brought me home after spending the weekend with my grandparents. It was honestly the best night's sleep I've had in a long time. Quiet, calm, and smelled like Grandma's cooking. As we got closer to home, just seeing it, I feel sick to my stomach. On entering, I actually stopped and dropped my overnight bag. The house felt different. Before I left with my cousin, it felt spooky and frightening. But now, the only thing I can feel is just seething anger. July 1986. General observation. I'm out of therapy. No more journal. Oh, I was keeping the journal going for something else though. I'm feeling better about myself and more self-confident. Meeting weekly in school for a D&D club transferred to meeting as a group of friends during summer vacation to play. I can honestly admit that I'm finally feeling more like a kid, or should I say teenager, as even I have noticed I'm becoming a bit more observant of girls. At least when I'm outside the house. It's now late July and summer. Long hot nights of little sleep. Everyone is always upset and angry at home. We need a few days of rain, to cool the house and tempers down, or something was going to give. Night. My room. It's hot and sticky, and none of the fans are helping. Dad was working on fixing the AC for the living room, but he's retired for the night after watching the 11 o'clock news. Our neighbours are outside. I can hear them talking and smell whatever they are cooking. I'm just waiting for exhaustion to take me. Early morning, my room. Something hit me in the night. It felt like a punch, and I awoke with my face and chest hurting. In the glow of the alarm clock, it showed me that it was 3:07 a.m. I got out of bed and flipped on my room light. My eyes immediately looked to the closet, and to my surprise, it was latched and closed. I noticed that my hands have blood on them, and there's blood on my chest. I headed for the bathroom. Night, approximately 3:15 a.m. Bathroom. Light on, I close the door and look at the damage in the medicine cabinet mirror. Split lip, dark mark around the side of my mouth. The busted lip was where the blood came from. There are 3 marks on my chest, as big around as a quarter. They hurt. I'm sure there will be bruises by tomorrow afternoon, as will my face. For some reason, I got angry at my reflection. It felt like every bad thought or negative feeling I've had about myself came back 10 times over, and all at once. In disgust with seeing myself and how I was feeling, I opened the cabinet so I don't have to see my reflection. The cabinet mirror is now facing the mirror behind the door. I start to notice small movement in the reflections of the mirrors in the door mirror. I caused an infinity reflection due to the mirrors reflecting each other. This meant there were multiple reflections of me. Now at my limit, I angrily tossed a towel that happened to land on the robe hook. The towel covered the mirror, and I could feel the pressure in the room subside considerably. I gathered myself, went through a few of the coping techniques I learned, finished cleaning myself up, and then exited the bathroom. For some reason, before turning the light to the bathroom off, I looked to the kitchen. The door leading to the sunroom and the back stairs was fully open. I shut the bathroom lights off, but there was still a glow from the room across from me. Dining room. The lights over the table are on, but not on. They are glowing dimly, even though we don't have dimmers in the house. I'm still angry from the feeling in the bathroom, and I couldn't stop myself from saying what was on my mind. Go to hell. The lights faded out, but I felt watched still. Suddenly my father is there, and I about jumped out of my skin. He asked me what I was doing up. He flipped the light on and saw me. Thinking that I may have been harming myself, he's checking out the marks and swollen lip. He's being loud when asking me what I did. Loud enough to wake my mother. That angry feeling flooded the room again, and the lights once again glowed dim. My dad looked at them with a puzzled how the hell look, just as my mum entered the dining room. I again almost jumped out of my skin as my 100-pound 5'2" mother lunged at my 6', 325-pound father, howling at my dad to leave him alone and don't touch him. I hit the lights for the dining room, which came on full brilliance, and I see my mother has her hands along the side of my father's face, her fingernails digging into the back of his ears with blood running down his neck. My father has a grip on her shoulders. I forced myself between them and split them apart, telling my mother that Dad didn't do this, and explaining what happened. I asked them if they couldn't feel something wasn't right in the house. This seemed to have cleared their minds. Dad and Mum talk. Mum doesn't know what came over her, and was just in full mama bear mode. Dad cleaned the blood off his neck, then we all talked. This time it seemed my parents might be grasping that something else might be at work here. Dad went to check the door to the back stairs. He said it was not wide open, but it was mostly closed and unlatched. The afternoon of the day after the fight, my parents have worked things out. My father spoke with Uncle Jay, and he decided that we needed a vacation, and we packed up some things and took off for New Hampshire for 5 days. End entry. Note from OP. This creeped me out as I had completely forgotten about this. I remembered my parents fighting one day, but not why. I didn't remember being physically injured. If I hadn't noted this before, my dad was a big dude. What I would not find out till after his death was that he was a Vietnam veteran. He didn't talk about it at all with us, but it did explain a lot about his behavior. Slept in short shifts, would go on long drives for himself in the night. It's amazing my father restrained himself so well, or this could have ended very badly. Or perhaps that's what this thing wanted to happen. Fifth entry about my house. Information from my father in 2013. So I have now reached the point where, as an adult, I started talking to my dad about all the crazy things that happened to us when I was growing up. I'll provide that information as applicable. My age when talking to my dad, 40. My age for this entry, 14 going on 15. It was at this point my dad revealed that the house was a funeral home before being purchased and renovated into a multi-family house. According to my father, the activity started when I was very young, only a toddler. It happened one evening after one of my aunt's friends felt something about the house and wanted to have, and then did hold, a seance. Then the feeling in the house changed from just creepy to horrific, because my aunt realized the seance must have been the reason that the house had activity. Unfortunately, she doubled down on the issue by having that same friend come in to do a cleansing. They didn't know what they were doing, just enacted something they had read in a book, according to Dad, and likely did it wrong and just riled everything up. My dad believed that moving was the best option for us, as nothing seemed to follow you once you left the house. To that end, my parents were trying to save for a down payment on the house, but we had a string of health issues that would undercut the savings. Examples will be coming up. My father believed that they, Mum and himself, were not in control of their emotions for my fourth entry. When we went on vacation, everything went back to normal between my parents and I. Also, while on vacation, my uncle had the house blessed by a priest. This priest was a friend and kin to my uncle, same Irish clan, and this is what seemed to have dialed everything down for a while, about 2 years. That changed in July 1988. July 1988, afternoon, outside the house. Hello again, my journal, it's been a while. Things have been quiet at home, creepy but quiet. I have returned to you today because I was helping my aunt and uncle load food up for our family barbecue. While carrying the trays of food, I noticed movement in the basement window. My mum and dad were outside loading our car. My uncle was behind me, and my aunt will not enter the basement. What I witnessed was approximately level with the basement window, which would make it about 6 foot tall, about my height now. It had a human-like shape, head and shoulders. Its head moved quickly side to side.
Seen it too, didn't you, lad?
I think so.
It's been biding its time, looking for a way out.
Yes, what is it?
Our clan called them Daemhan, and they are not natural. They find and feed on fear, anger and sorrow. They sow these emotions like crops, then harvest the field.
Well, journal, looks like I won't be sleeping the rest of my time here. Parents are saving for a new house. Night, returning home from the barbecue. We have returned home to something completely unexpected. Several police officers are on the front porch. The police talk to my uncle and my dad. My dad comes over to us and tells my mother to take me and go to my grandmother's. Dad tells us that apparently the kid broke in and damaged the place, and they are checking for missing property. We head to my grandmother's for the night. Morning, grandmother's house. Dad returned around mid-morning. He tells us that we will likely have to stay here for a while. Nothing was taken, but there is damage and blood in the house. A neighbor called the cops when she noticed a broken window. My dad then goes into what happened to the best of everyone's knowledge. Someone shattered the basement window along the side of the house near the oil ports. I had such a bad feeling because that was the window I saw my uncle's Daemhan in. My dad continued. They apparently cut themselves on the glass. It looks like they slipped into the basement through the broken window. got a pry bar from the tool wall, and pried the basement door open. The cops found the locked padlock on the floor by the door. Then, they damaged and destroyed the doors to open up the first floor, and then proceeded to damage or destroy the interior doors on our floor, except the attic door and our living room doors. Mum asked my dad what he thought would have happened if we had been home. The colour left my father's face, and his words chilled me. I don't know. End entry. August 1998, afternoon. It took us a few weeks, but my dad and I helped my uncle get the doors repaired. On our floor, the bathroom door was undamaged. All the other doors had been hacked into by a pry bar. My uncle was a bit skittish with working in the house, as it sometimes got things riled up. We finished in relative peace. Being that it was still early in the afternoon, the three of us took the tools down to the tool board. As we passed the step off for the storage room, the temperature radiating from the room was at least 20 degrees colder. My glasses instantly fogged over and I almost fell into the storage room. My uncle caught me and pulled me back. We quickly gathered the tools I dropped, my uncle talking quietly under his breath. Do not look into the room, lad. Seek not the dayman. We got the tools over to the board, only to discover all the tools are on the floor. We quickly get the tools back on the board, but the three of us can hear booted footsteps behind us by the basement stairs. My uncle decided to use the auxiliary stairs that brings us up a narrow stairway to the first floor, into what I always thought was a closet, but it was actually a stairwell into his living room. As we locked the door, something pounded on it 3 times. We ran to the main basement door, pulled it closed, and clapped the padlock on it. This door also gets pounded on 3 times. We backed away as the door rattled against the frame, then stopped. I had a quick word with my uncle. I thought it was gone. No, lad. Dormant, maybe. We all went upstairs to wait in our living room. My uncle for my aunt who was out with friends, and my father and I for my mother who was working late. The phone rang, making everyone jump. I went and answered to hear my mother state she was just leaving work. So I let my dad know. My uncle, looking out the living room window, saw my aunt get dropped off and left to meet her. Half an hour later my mother arrived home and I went down to the main entryway to help her with her belongings. This was something I always did because my mother worked so late before the weekend. As I meet my mother at the door, before I could even greet her properly, my mother exclaimed, "What is that?" looking past my shoulder. And that is when something hit me from behind, launching me outside into my mother, sending her backwards and down the outside stairs. Note from 2020 OP. Now at the time I was 15, I was eye to eye with my father at 6'11", and 200 pounds give or take a cheeseburger or 3. I played a lot of football and hockey. I knew how to take a hit, even when I didn't see it coming. My mum, 5'3" and then 115 pounds if that. Quick math. Mass times acceleration equals the first class ticket for my mum aboard the pain train. The aftermath. ER trip for my mother and I. I get 2 bruised ribs, a bruised back, and a dislocated left shoulder. My mother, 4 bruised ribs, sprained wrist, fractured arm, and a sprained ankle. The damage, while not as severe as it could have been, all but wiped out the savings my parents had for moving. The official story was I slipped on a non-existent throw rug at the bottom of the stairs and caused the wipeout. Back at home recovering, I asked my mother what she saw. She took out a Celtic cross necklace, a gift from my grandfather, that I rarely see her wearing, the knotwork on it forming the cross itself, and she held it in her hand and said only one word: darkness.
December 1988. I recovered faster than my mother from the September experience. But with the holidays coming, everyone is feeling a bit better. Our family tradition is to start decorating for Christmas after Thanksgiving. This means Mum gets to break out her carols on vinyl, and the Sears system belts out Bing, Nat King Cole, the Three Tenors, and the like. I help my uncle decorate outside, plastic toy soldiers, giant plastic candles, big bulb string lights, and a big plastic Santa that gets put up on the ledge outside our living room window. We secured it to the ledge and make sure that there is no tension on the cords. The house, however, is still creepy. We can hear footsteps in the night, banging on doors and occasionally walls. And we all had this uneasy feeling with the bathroom mirror to the point we permanently hung a thick cloth over it. But no big activities in September, and Christmas is typically a safe time of the year. Christmas Eve. My uncle always has a huge party, lots of laughing, singing, drinking, lots of Irish prayers answered. This was the same my uncle used to like when the bottle of Irish rye was empty and an unopened one magically appeared to replace it. Now traditionally, my uncle will announce that he thinks he hears reindeer bells, which gets the kids wanting to go home and officially ends the party. This year, however, it was a younger cousin who shouted, "I hear Santa's footsteps," about 2 hours before the party was set to end. Sure enough, there are loud footsteps overhead, when all of a sudden the room breaks out in peals of young children screaming, as right out the large front window, Santa swung back and forth, extension cord wrapped around his plastic neck. My father and I bolt upstairs because we know the plastic Santa was right out front of our living room window on a large overhang. I reach the stairwell door, and to my surprise the door is closed and locked. I get out my key and open it as my dad gets to the landing. I'd honestly expected it to be open. Inside, all the lights in the house are off, including our Christmas lights. I grab the flashlight that's on the kitchen counter near the door and shine the light down the hallway. The bathroom, pantry, living room, and parents' bedroom doors are closed, and the hallway runner is pulled back to the living room door. We go down the hallway and open the door to the living room. It takes a moment for my father and I to register what we see. The living room window is wide open. The plastic Santa is gone, but the window plastic sheet is intact and still sealed to the window frame. We tear the plastic off, pull the Santa back up, and secure it back in place. We close, lock, and Dad gets the plastic to seal the window once again. There was no wind and no ice. Dad finishes applying the plastic sheet and tells me to go get my mother's hairdryer from her dresser top so he can seal up the plastic. I get the hairdryer, and as I return to my father, I forget about the hallway runner. It tangles around my feet and I fall. As I'm on the floor, I think I see someone in the light of the doorframe to the stairwell. But when I pull myself up, no one is there. I give the hairdryer to my father, and about 10 minutes later, we have the window sealed up. The stairwell doors bang once, and then we hear another door bang, and assume it's the basement. We go around and discover the Christmas lights unplugged, which we most definitely know they were not when we left. We return to the party. No one seems to have noticed anything. I explain to my uncle in private what happened. Family starts filtering out and the party ends. My father slips me a swig of rye, to which I cough, sputter, gulp, but do keep down, and my mother returns from midnight mass. We retire upstairs. The change in the house is like entering the eye of a storm. It's suddenly calm and peaceful, but you know it's only temporary. February 1989. Things have changed in the house again, and not for the better. After the new year, I've noticed my dad staying awake longer, late into the night. He had always been a light sleeper, and usually got home from work and power napped till my mum got home. but he always went to bed between 10 and 10:30 and up for work at 3:30. But now I'm hearing him up and it's just after midnight. The weird thing is I've seen him standing in the middle of the dining room, staring into my room. I've also seen him in the middle of the hallway, looking into the kitchen. One night he was in the middle of my room, looking at me. I tried to talk to him, but he just wouldn't respond. Just shook his head slowly, no. He snapped out of it later and just went to bed. I've tried talking to him about it, and he said he doesn't remember. March 1989. Dad's still doing that standing in the rooms thing. I'm getting worried. Mum doesn't remember him getting up, so I'm thinking he's not going to bed. Sunday night I found him in the kitchen. He had something in his hand. I could tell from the light from the window. It was metal. I backed off to my room. I heard him drop something into the sink before going to bed. In the morning, I discovered it was a kitchen knife. I made sure to move the knife block off the counter and into one of the other cabinets after that. Late March 1989. Tonight, about 7, Dad fell asleep on the couch and was having a bad dream. He kept muttering that, "They are coming, they are coming, they are here." He started tossing and turning. I tried to wake him up. As I did, his hand shot up and grabbed me by the throat. His hand felt like ice. Pounding on his forearm was like punching concrete. His other hand was right in my face, index finger curled as if holding something. His finger flexed and he snapped out of it, pulled me into a hug and apologized. Dad never showed open affection and never apologized. I asked what was going on, and he said he would tell me one day, but not today. Mum will be home soon. Tonight is her late night. I moved the knife block to the pan cabinet again. April 1989. My dad just woke up from a nap, sweating and having trouble breathing. He was complaining about something inside him and that it hurt and that he needs help. Mum took him to the emergency room. The house is eerily quiet, literally and figuratively. Hours pass when my mother calls. She's crying. She tells me my father had a heart attack. She's staying with him. My grandfather's coming to take me to see him. We arrived at the hospital and rushed to my father's room. A priest was leaving the room, obviously, saying a blessing and seeing us. He started to say words that are obviously meant to comfort, but I just wanted to reach my dad. Dad was in his room, awake, but in some pain and discomfort. Tubes and wires everywhere. He was going to be headed to surgery for a procedure to clear a blockage. There was some danger involved, but it was less risky than doing nothing at all. They wheeled him from the room. Mum's a wreck. We all waited together. The surgeon informed us that the procedure was successful, but that they still needed to evaluate the damage to his heart, but at least he is out of immediate danger for now. Dad spent 8 days in the hospital. A couple of weeks more on home rest. It appears that our carefree days of large, extra cheese, onion and pepperoni pizzas will be at an end. No more standing in the room. He goes to bed around 9:30 now. Mum is going to church again. I'm just glad to have my dad, even if it cost us the savings from moving out to our own house. It is still quiet, but I can help but think, was the house doing this to keep us here? I hate this house. Additional notes. My father never told me what he was dreaming about. It's likely this fell into the category of things he didn't want me to know what he did. My guess is it had to do with his army experience. He started watching the show Tour of Duty almost religiously. It was after his passing that I learned he was a Vietnam vet. Whatever he did in service, it obviously stayed with him. June 1989. I really don't know what's going on with the house. Dad's recovered well. We go fly fishing on the weekends with one or both of my grandfathers. Mum goes out with friends or visits my grandmother's. Basically, we try to be home the least amount as possible. Mum said something tried to push her down the stairs after she got to the top. She caught the handrail and didn't fall, but had a gnarly bruise on her shoulder. This kind of freaked her out, as seeing how it hasn't been a long time since I was a human wrecking ball. We, Dad, Uncle and paternal grandfather, have been working in the attic and have included me. We are now building it into an attic Irish pub. Something is not happy about the pub. We have to use the back stairs to get to the attic. Every time we carry bags up the split, plastic tote handles snap and the cold radiating from the basement door is so strong you can sometimes see your breath. My uncle and grandfather are great woodworkers, and the pub is coming along nicely. My father has been teaching me billiards, 8-ball and 9-ball, and we are learning snooker together, despite not having a 12-foot snooker table. My grandfather brought over a handmade plaque that reads Sullivan's Pub. It has Celtic knots around the border. My grandfather explains to everyone in his thick brogue. Listen here, lads. Pa got some old magic from home. This here means, may Erin, Ireland, protect those that cross his threshold. He hung the plaque just over the door. The attic was where we would watch sports, shoot pool, and become a place where the clans came together. It was finished July 4th, 1989. July 1989. We are starting to hear animal noises. All kinds of animals. Then, there are scratches. Deep scratches being left in the floor and walls near the attic door. The scratches are always in groups of 3s. The wall has been pounded on at night. My closet is once again creaking open despite the hook and eye lock on it. Now I'm also seeing something walking past my door in the early morning hours, and it's huge. It blocks out the streetlights from the living room window. There's also a smell to it, again like wet moss and old copper pennies. There are scratches on the inside of my closet door and walls. Also, I'm seeing eyes outside my window. These could be the old barn owl, but it's never sat looking into my window at night before. My friends don't come over anymore. They say even just standing on the porch makes them feel unsafe. One even went so far as to say he felt like something bad was going to happen. End entry. August 1989. Saturday morning. Hot, humid. My mum left for a trip with her sisters. She is headed north, where it's a lot cooler. Lucky. So it's just Dad and I for the weekend. We have a day of fly fishing, playing pool and watching old movies together, and generally trying to avoid the sun. Fishing was good. We caught a ton of sunfish. Eventually, it just got too hot to be out in the sun, so we packed it in and headed off for home. Afternoon. By this time, we had to be pushing 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's so damn hot out. My uncle has installed an old AC window unit for the pub. It's good enough to take the humidity and some of the heat out of the open room. Dad planned ahead and got a case of Yacht Club soda for me, and naturally my uncle got some Irish ale. We listened to the Gaelic tunes and played some pool. Now, the attic pub has become an oasis in a sea of bizarre events. Nothing happens in the attic. Outside the attic is another story. Entering the attic, the door will bang as if someone wants to get in. The finish on the door will be scratched. The walls will pound. Around the door started to smell at first like wet moss and body pennies. Then it got real bad,
like rotting food and body odor. After shooting pool and hanging out with my uncle, we headed down to our floor. On entering, we hear this high-pitched beeping. We find that it's my father's weather alert receiver. He turned the volume up. National Weather Service. Severe thunderstorm watch issued. Tornado watch issued for this afternoon and into the early morning hours. This is a new one for me. We do not get tornado watches issued often. Once every couple of years or so if there is a hurricane. I will let my uncle know to stay tuned to TV or radio. The storm. Nightfall. Dad and I had spent the better part of the evening watching old movies. We could see the flashes of lightning off in the distance outside the living room window. It was almost like a strobe light. Dad flipped the TV over to a local station just in time to catch them interrupting the program to let us know that we are now under a severe thunderstorm warning. Vivid lightning, hail, and the possibility of a tornado. Now we both realize how this could go bad. If a tornado did form, we would have to head into the basement at night during a storm, knowing what it was like down there. Now we could hear the thunder rolling, and the flashes of lightning were brighter. We turned the living room AC off and opened the window a bit. My father believed that the open windows helped to equalize some of the air pressure in the event of a tornado. He said he learned that in the army. What it did do was let the outside air in, and you could smell the ozone from the charge in the air. Sure enough, the next flash strobed the house white, like blinking your eye rapidly. Count. Make 5 Mississippi and boom, thunder. Next lightning strobe lit the house up green, and I happened to have been glancing towards my room. I saw that my closet door was wide open. My father asked me if I saw green when the lightning flashed. Before I could say anything to my dad, the room lit up purple. Still looking into my room, the door was shut. Another purple flash and 4 Mississippi. Boom. More lightning, green and purple, and a huge boom. I saw my closet door fly open. The doorknob had to be embedded in the drywall. Green lightning flashed. Count 2 Mississippi. I'm writing this the following morning, in the safety of the daylight. I never want to go through what happened last night again. I'm hoping my memory is accurate. I'm sure this will haunt my dreams for years. I remember the sudden absence of electronic sound as the power cut out. The crack of thunder indicative of a ground strike. Black punctuated by flashes of green and purple, constantly rolling thunder. Dad asks me to get the extra candles and flashlight from the stash in the kitchen, while he gets Mum's candles from their hope chest. I remember leaving the living room and going into the hallway, close to my parents' room. The lightning is flashing and the thunder is so loud. They are both nearly constant. The heart of the storm must have been just about over us. The winds picked up and started howling like a pack of wolves. I could see into the kitchen. The door to the back stairs was wide open. It was locked. I know it was locked because I locked it. Then something stepped out of the bathroom. Not funny, Dad. What was in front of me was as big as my dad. As the lightning flashed, I saw it move to its full height. The hallway was at least 8 foot high and 4 feet wide. And this thing took up most of it, as I couldn't see past it into the kitchen. This entity was bigger and wider than my father, and suddenly, a hand was on my shoulder pulling me back. That's not me, boy. Words I hope to forget from my father. I cannot look away as my father tries to pull me back. The entity's black. Even in the lightning, it's as black as can be. It had arms, long and thick, ending in hands that it touched both side walls of the hallway. These hands appeared to be what I can only describe as hawk-like talons. It had a massive head, and the lightning would reflect back from 3 points, one higher and centered, the other 2 about where you expect eyes. It tilted its head like a dog hearing a high-pitched sound. and then started to move its head side to side, till it was moving it like a blur, and only the color of the lightning flashes reflected. It started to move at us. My father pulled me back hard, and we were just about at the end of the hallway. Shit! A peal of thunder mixed with every kind of animal cry you could think of tore down the hallway. The entity gouged the wall near the pantry door. When it howled, the area under its eyes got even darker. My father flung me into the living room, stepped inside and closed the door behind him. We lit my mother's candles she had in the living room. The light cast shadows on the walls. These shadows moved differently than the flickering of the flames, like they scurried under the door and away from the light. The lightning flashed, the thunder boomed, the wind howled. The thing in the hallway slammed the closed door. My father moved to shut the door between the living room and the dining room. The living room was closed off. Dad opened the window. We would jump if we had to. Each door pounded, dining room, then hallway, and the shadows would creep under the door, only to shrink when the candlelight touched the door. My dad took down an antique wood-framed polished silver mirror from the wall and put it behind the candles, reflecting the candlelight on the doors. The animal sounds continued and got louder. Something walked up and down the hallway. A thunderous crash from outside as a huge part of an oak tree came down. Lightning flashed, still that odd green and purple color. The storm raged for a while longer. It felt like hours, but we didn't have power. The storm passed. The smell of wet grass and broken wood replaced the ozone smell. All became quiet in the house, except for the dripping of water. End entry.
August 1989, after the storm. OP note, we did not have a tornado. What we had is referred to now as a microburst, a localized downward blast of high-speed wind, no rotation. As I write this, I'm honestly thankful for making it through that storm and the night. First off, Mum is okay. No storms up her way. She'll be home later after learning about the storm damage. As to the storm damage, the winds brought down a good part of the old oak tree in the backyard. It hit the AC window unit in the attic and tore the windows and frame out. We salvaged what we could from the attic, notably my grandfather's plaque, but a lot of the woodworking that was done was lost to rain, wind and hail. On our floor, the ceilings are damaged from the rain that got into the attic when the AC unit tested gravity and lost. They will need to be replaced. In my room, the closet was opened so forcefully that the hinges are partially out of the frame, and the doorknob is indeed embedded into the drywall. I can't be positive, but I think I hear a faint whisper from the permanently open closet. I tried using my mother's boombox to record on cassette, but I think it's too soft. The hallway was slashed down the drywall. 3 furrows, dug about 3/4 of the way through. Whatever did it, well, I know what did it, was sharp and likely could have palmed my entire head with no difficulty. The living room door and frame was badly damaged. The hallway runner got sucked down the hallway and ended up in the sunroom. From the sunroom we could see damage to other houses. There was a swing set in the backyard. We don't own a swing set. The garden was crushed. Afternoon. My uncle came upstairs, and I swear he looked older than he did last night. After making sure everyone was okay, my uncle looked at the hallway walls. It was here, wasn't it? My uncle asked us, and we could only nod our heads. Come on, lads. He motioned us to follow him, and we did. Down the back stairs to the first floor. Oddly, the stairs were wet from the water that came from the attic. The door to his living area was pushed in, wood splinters everywhere. The basement door was crushed outward. The door to the backyard was wide open.
Another large branch from the oak tree came down apparently. A neighbor's cat was sitting in the yard sunning herself. I had always given her some food or water when I saw her, so she came to let me know that she was hungry. When she got near the basement door, there was an odd animal sound from the dark basement that was followed by the same breathy whisper from my closet.
Come down.
This time I'm positive I could hear a whispered voice. The cat must have heard it too, because it crouched down, side to the door, back arched, and she hissed and spit before running off. The hairs on our arms are standing on end as we continued to hear the whisper of
Come see.
from the dark open basement. I heard it. I know I did. And with their eyes moving back and forth, I could tell that my dad and my uncle heard it too. My uncle regained himself and explained that something... He paused, hearing a whisper of the word
Me.
Something appeared to him and my aunt in their kitchen. My aunt thought it was an animal enraged by the storm. We heard more animal noises from the basement. A growl was my guess. My uncle continued as he mentioned how my aunt bolted from their living room. My uncle told us how the entity moved from their kitchen to the stairwell, and he heard what sounded like hooves going up the stairs. My uncle came upstairs to see what damage would be covered by insurance and what damage would not, before heading out to get lumber and plaster. Evening. We boarded up my closet door, and we helped my uncle board up the attic window. It felt violated in the attic after all the joy and hard work was lost. To make matters worse, the whispering could be heard as we put the last screw into the plywood.
See you.
Later that evening, when my mother returned, Dad and I agreed we don't want to tell Mum about the entity. Dad talked with my mother and decided to pick up extra shifts on the weekend, and Mum would start working on Saturdays in a new pilot program to have banks open on the weekend instead of till 9 p.m. on Fridays. Dad was determined to have us move out by next year. In the meantime, I'll stay with my grandparents over the weekends. They need help around their house, and we want to spend the least amount of time in our house. We went to sleep in the early hours of the morning, or at least I tried to. I kept hearing the squeak of a wood screw slowly turning. I was startled awake by the sound of a wood screw falling from a height and hitting the hardwood strip just before my bedroom carpet. End entry. April 1990. Aside from the annoying whispers to enter the closet or the basement, the loud thumps and sets of 3 thuds, things have been going well, but anytime I don't see that things are going well. First off, I've been accepted into a state-run vocational high school. Also, I'm trying something new. Well, new to me. I'm trying to come out of my shell more. I'm hoping that a more positive mindset might help keep the thing away. So yes, things are going well. In fact, over the past several months, after a slimmed down holiday season and a bit of luck, we might be moving. The prospect of moving was slow going at first, but my parents and I stayed positive. And then it happened. My parents got lucky and hit the lottery. Not the jackpot, but enough that after taxes, they now have enough money to do a down payment and reduce the amount of time needed to be borrowed. This nightmare could finally be coming to an end. The light at the end of the tunnel. There are 3 solid knocks on my new, since the storm, closet door. This seems to happen more and more to remind me not to get too happy. So I gave the door the finger. I'm not letting this place take this joy from me. June 1990. My parents are assholes. Well, only in the sense that they pranked me good. It's the last day of school and I had just gotten home. All my stuff was gone. All my parents' stuff was gone. I went to the phone to call them at work. No dial tone. I went to the living room. No TV. I tried to turn on the lights. No power. The thought that someone broke in again was quickly put aside when I heard laughing from the sunroom. My parents just pop up from the sunroom, and honestly scared the hell out of me, and tell me to get my stuff and that we are going for a ride. We head down the stairs and Mum and Dad head outside. As I reach the front door, I hear the hallway door behind and above me open and then slam closed, and what to me sounds like heels moving quickly on the stairs. I exit and close and lock the front door. We drove to another town and pull up in front of a blue-sided raised ranch off a back road. We go inside and it felt like what home should feel like. I spotted my grandfather's plaque over the door, and that's when I knew this was our home. I found my bed. There was an AC unit in the wall, but under my room's window, holy crap, I'm not going to swelter this summer. This town is closer to the vocational school I was just accepted into, and the yard was definitely big enough for a dog. My father tells me that we will no longer be sleeping in our old place. Years of stress just washed away. First night in our new home. Mum is sound asleep. Dad and I are on the back deck, going over how tomorrow we get the rest of the furniture. We will need to be extra careful not to take anything from the old place that we found in it when we moved in. Sometimes I think Dad forgets I was 3 when we moved in. Early the next morning. I awoke early with that initial panic of where am I filling me. Remembering the new house, I got up and walked around. I went past my parents' room, past the bathroom, into the kitchen and dining room, into the large common room. Home. I went downstairs into the basement. I was actually in a basement in the middle of the night. I turned on the lights and noticed my father had moved all his tools and fishing stuff. I realized that they must have been doing this all week long as I was finishing school. We had to the end of the month to move our belongings, and we did with my uncle's help. He would meet us at the old place and help us move the larger items like tables and chairs. We left some of our older furniture to keep the place usable for my uncle. There had been talk about bringing his adult kids to fill the apartment as they were getting on in years. My uncle would crack jokes like, "Anything in the basement or closet you want to take?" A good laugh was had, but a nervous laugh. The closet door knocked loudly 3 times. It had to have the final say on our last day. And with that, we finished up and left, giving the keys to my uncle. Night. Home. Both my father and I had trouble sleeping, as we were concerned that my uncle being so glib might have caused problems and provoked the entity. We both found ourselves looking out over the backyard. Muggy July night, some fog covering the grass. We were both watching something large move around the edge of the property, carefully. It never crossed the property line. Thinking it was a large animal. "Go, you don't belong here. You have no power here," I found myself muttering over and over again. My father pointed out that it looked like a bull, pointed out horns, and then it was gone. July 1990. Nothing. Just peace and calm. I got the lawnmower out of the basement today, cut the grass, cleaned it up, put it away. No issue. We got an Australian Shepherd puppy. She's running around her dog run and digging a hole by the tree to nap in. I think this will likely be my goodbye entry. I think it's finally over. Yes, it's finally over. To anyone that ever finds this is the honest account of life in that house. May you never see what I saw that night in August of 1989. Peaceful dreams. August 1990. I had hoped to never write in this journal again, but 1 year to the day that we saw the entity, here I am. No, it's not our new home. As I've kept this up for so long, and he meant so much to me, it's only fitting to enter this here. We received a call from my grandfather. My aunt from our old place had gone away on a trip. When she returned, she couldn't find my uncle. She saw the basement door was open and saw his body crumpled on the stairs. She called the police and rescue, but my uncle had a massive heart attack and this triggered a fall. The fall created any number of life-threatening injuries. They pronounced at the scene, "My uncle has fallen. He's gone." My father and I feel horrible. We got away, but the devil was paid his due. End journal. Epilogue, Part 1. Conversation with my father. August 2010. First day of hospice care. I'm visiting my father. The doctors have said without any more treatments, he has 3 months. Stage 4 cancer, riddled throughout his body. My father made the hard choices so we didn't have to. He's refusing treatment and signed a DNR because the tumours are in all major organs and inoperable. This larger-than-life man in my younger years, who stood 6 foot tall and pushed 375 pounds for most of my childhood, was now gaunt and about 110 pounds. When I was a kid, he could easily hoist me in the air with one arm. Now, I was able to lift him with one arm. I bring my daughter over to visit as often as I can. She knows Grandpa is sick. They watch Thomas the Tank Engine together. My father watches it even without her, to keep up with the plot twists, his quote. One afternoon my daughter went down for a nap after playing with Grandpa and watching Thomas. It was then my father decided to show me a Ghost Hunters series he started recording on TiVo. We watch a couple of episodes, and then he decides it's time to talk. Our conversation went like this. "Not like our old apartment, huh?" No, nothing like that." "Too bad these guys weren't around then. That would have scared the pimples off their ass. We just had those two from Connecticut, Ed and Rose." Ed and Lorraine Warren.
"Yeah, those two, yeah. They did assemblies when I was in school. Only ones I wouldn't ditch on." "So, you know it was an old funeral parlor, right?" "What was? Our old apartment?" "Oh yeah. The basement was the embalming room. Uncle's floor was for viewings. And our floor was the funeral director's living space. That closet of yours was a lift to get the bodies up and down. You never worked that one out?" "No. Kind of explains a lot." "Oh yeah. Creepy shit started happening weeks after we moved in. Minor stuff. Windows opening, doors banging. But when you got older, you started talking to an old man who wasn't there." "Dad, what the fuck?" "Go through the old picture albums you got from Mum. I think there is a few we took of you with a white mist in the background or around you." I thought that was cigarette smoke." "Nope. We were too poor to move. My parents couldn't take us. And well, your mum's mother? As for me, I would rather naked wrestle a horny porcupine and swim in a pool of Purell than live with that woman." "Thanks for the visual, Dad." "You're welcome, boy." The apartment was all we had. You used to talk about the adventure the old man said you would have and the treasure you would find in the cave. Okay, I don't recall that. You were just a little shit then. Now, you're a big shit. Shut up and listen. The cave was your name for the area under the stairwell in the basement. You know the one. Wait, I hated that room. Yeah, that's because that was the first time you ever saw the shadow. What was Uncle Jay's word for it? Demon. It's old Gaelic for demon. Nerd. Yeah, Uncle Jay enjoyed teaching you the old language. Anyway, from that point on, it was head up under the blankets, monsters in the closet. You stopped talking to the old man and thought he wanted to hurt you. You're creeping me out now. Yeah, well, it got worse. The treasure you spoke of was the safe that was built into the foundation. Uncle Jay did some checking into the background of the funeral guy. Not a good man. 5th generation asshat businessman.
and a convicted conman to boot. He was known for slipping valuables into the safe from the deceased. His partner, incidentally, was the one who set up the room in the attic and got the pool table up there. He notified the authorities when he learned of it. Dad, why did Uncle Jay buy this place? Dirt cheap real estate, boy. Our Uncle Jay never believed this stuff till after we moved in, and the activity increased. Anyway, after things started happening, Uncle Jay went into the basement where he stashed a trunk of odds and ends he found in the house. And in the trunk was a set of old ledgers where the last entry in it was, "I'm done. The rat bastard turned me in. Family legacy gone to shit. May the devil take him and everyone that comes to this house after us." That night, according to Uncle Jay, both the director and the partner vanished. House went to some nephew who renovated it. Set on the market for a while. Aunt and uncle snapped it up cheap. When Aunt G's friend heard it was a funeral home, she was all gung-ho to have those communications parties and bring in those Miss Chloe psychics. Got to the point where Uncle Jay had a priest come bless the house. Things quietened down for a while. Then the break-in. The doors and thresholds were damaged. The blessing was vacated, and it came back, seething mad. Go on. Do you mean you never wondered why we had your grandmother get you from school instead of coming home? Why we worked all those weekends and you stayed at your grandparents'? It wasn't until you were older where it just wasn't feasible to have your grandparents watch you after school. That's when you really started to notice things. No, Dad, I never worked it out. Just thought you were saving money in that. What did it look like to you? To me, it was shrouded, had 3 eyes, hands like hawk talons. Big, 3 eyes, long horns pointing forward, clawed hands. Darker than the dark around it. After that night in the storm, we were leaving, come hell or high water. Got lucky, got the cash for the payment, got out. Your mum had a priest bless the house. Pa, grandfather, carved and buried the 4 stones. You know, I would see the damn bull shadow in the trees outside our property sometimes. The first night we saw it together, then it took Uncle Jay. You know that, right? I believe it took him from us. Saw it again the night you moved out. Over the nights leading up to your mum passing. The day we put the dog down. And now I see it. Like it wants me to know it was waiting for me. My dad's meds kicked in, and it was lights out on Painkiller Express. Another one of his quotes. End of part 1. Notes. My father passed 1 month later. We never spoke of the encounter again. Pictures. I looked through the pictures I still have to see if I have any of the house, the rooms, or the mist. Nothing stood out, but I definitely remember seeing the mist, thinking it was just cigarette smoke. A lot of those albums got ruined in the floods we had several years ago. I'll have another good look when we do our annual deep cleaning. Old man. I do not remember an imaginary friend. This was new news to me. 4 stones. An old clan ritual using 4 stones from Erin that are carved with Celtic knots for protection, prosperity, peace, and passion, and buried in the 4 corners of the property. Epilogue, Part 2. Conversation with my cousin. August 2010. The last time I saw my extended family was at my father's memorial, or, if you will, an Irish funeral. A send-off of booze, food, stories and accomplishments of the deceased. Part memorial, part comedy roast. There you have it. It's there I reconnect with my cousins. Let's jump forward several months. March 2011. Have you ever felt like your past was on a collision course with your present, and while you are waiting for the thunderous boom as the two meet, instead it's a simple electronic ringing of a cell phone that
heralds the reunion. Phone rings. I see the contact info. Hello? Hey, it's Cousin One. Listen, I wanted to ask you something, but, it wasn't right last time we all met. Sure, what's up? So, my brother and I inherited the old place you used to live at. Yeesh. You've had weird things happen, and now you want to know if I've ever experienced anything like it while I was living there? Dude, yeah. Yes. Everything from noises to smells. Banging doors, cabinets opening and closing, toys turning on, lights flickering, temperature differences. My dad and I even saw it once. Really? Yes, there's something dark there. Now, before you go any further, let me get some paper. Okay, now, are you aware of the house's history? I'm going to put you on my speakerphone so my brother can join in. How's it going? Not bad. So you guys know the house was a funeral home? No. Yeah, Dad told me. Owned by a real crook. Stole from the deceased. It's at this point I tell them everything I know about the house's past. Stunned silence. Everyone said we shouldn't live there. Just sell it. But we thought it'd be good to keep it in the family. I've got the first floor, brother's got the second. My girlfriend and our kid are with me on the second. Cousin 2, if you got your kid in the backmost bedroom, that used to be my room, and if I were you, I would change it. That closet. It uses that closet. It tormented me for years with that damn closet. Yeah, we found it open several mornings in a row, and sometimes at night I can hear my kid talking. I asked him this morning who he talks to, and he said the old man that lives in the closet. We switched rooms, but it still keeps opening, and it's like being watched all the time. My father told me I saw an old man when I was a kid. He was trying to get me to go to the basement. Yeah, nope. We don't keep anything in the basement, not after the movers got hurt. What happened? We hired some guys to move everything out of the attic and basement. Attic was fine, but guys had a hell of a time in the basement. One guy fell down the stairs. One guy, trying to get that safe moved, had it fall on his leg. That crew quit over the basement, so we hired another crew. Dude, one guy lost 2 fingers trying to move that safe. He swears something bit them off. It's the only thing remaining in the basement. Some friends and family wanted some of the things in the house. Anyone that took anything returned it within a week. Said it made their house feel creepy. Has anyone seen it? Seen what? I explained the entity as I remembered it. No way. Yes. Look, it seems to build and build, then does something really frightening. Then takes time to savor the chaos it's created. Then it starts up again. Honestly, don't screw around with it. It can seriously screw with you. Like, you guys ever get into stupid fights? Get so angry for no reason? If so, that's what this thing feeds off. Yes. Yes, we do. How do we stop it? I don't think you can. But Dad said Uncle Jay had some luck with an Irish priest, but it was always short-lived. It seems to be bound to the house and to items in the house. When we moved, we left a bunch of stuff just to make sure. We'll try that. Okay, good luck, guys. By 2012, they will have moved out. Epilogue, Part 3. Conversation with my cousins. November 2011. Cousin 1 calls me and tells me that they have moved out, and why. I'm obviously on speakerphone. Here is how the conversation goes. Man, we really screwed up. We had to move. We are going to put that place up and never look back. What happened? My brother had a priest from his church visit and bless each room of the house, upstairs and downstairs. They said that they would need to do this a few times. After about a month, the house grew calm, and we thought that it was over. It was really like a new place. I take it something changed? Yeah. Man, I really screwed up after our Halloween party. See, my brother and I threw a party. Drinking was involved. We had gotten a good buzz and had been talking about the odd stuff going on, and, well, we thought it was finally gone. Dormant is more likely. You're right.
It was really dumb to think it's gone. Anyway, one of our guests, this was a guy we let in on the weird things going on, and right from the start he wanted to try the Ouija board. We told him no constantly, but he would always bring it up. Goes to his car and brings out, yep, a Ouija board, and says, let's find out. Please tell me you didn't use that thing. Not in that house. I was buzzed. My brother had left the party, but 3 others stayed, and somehow we ended up sitting around this board. Lights off, candles burning, asking questions and drinking. So, using the board, we asked, is there anyone who will speak with us?
No.
No one will speak with us?
Yes.
What is your name? No response. Were you alive once?
No.
What are you?
We are.
What are you doing here tonight?
Waiting.
What are you waiting for?
Blood.
At that, a glass on the table tipped over and shattered. We jumped up and a few of the candles went out. We continued. Did you do that?
Yes.
Are you going to show us more?
No.
Are you trying to harm us? No response. What do you want?
Kill.
Have you killed before?
Yes.
What did people do to you?
Cold.
When were you called?
1908.
Why were you called?
Revenge.
Revenge on who?
Thief.
Doors began banging in the house. The sound woke me up. My girlfriend and I swapped bedrooms with our kid. The room felt uncomfortable and cold. I know I heard something in the closet. We heard the banging, but we continued. Is that you again?
We are here.
When did you come to this house?
1925.
Why stay in this house?
Sorrow.
The mourners woke you?
Hunger.
Will you ever leave?
Never.
What if we call a priest again? No response. What if we have a psychic come in?
Mad.
What if we force you to leave?
We are here.
The table felt like it lifted, so everyone stood up from the table. Someone hit the lights and they came on. We could see blood and glass on the planchette. We all had cuts from the glass on our fingers. Just then, the doors stopped slamming. The planchette on the board, untouched by anyone covered in our blood, moves to goodbye. That's when it all came on, growling and banging from the door in the living room that heads down to the basement. The lights seemed to dim and it looked like shadows were crawling out and wiggling from under the door. We started shouting. I thought you were pulling our chain a bit, but I turned on all the lights on the second floor that I could and tried to rush downstairs, but I had to stop. Stuff was coming out of the door to the basement, and it was starting to move up the stairs. It was ice cold if you stepped on it. I raced back upstairs and got my girlfriend. It had started to come out from under our bedroom closet, like a black fog. We ran and got our kid, turned to leave, and that's when we saw it, standing in the kitchen. My kid said, "Look, it's the old man." But what was in the kitchen wasn't a man. It was huge, big head, long arms, ending in clawed hands, and just as black as I have ever seen. I got my keys and we ran. We ran outside, got in the car and we were gone. Then it appeared downstairs. My friends bolted as it hurled the planchette at us. We ran from the house. What I remember next is that both outside doors slamming shut at the same time. So everyone's unharmed? Yes. Did it ever follow you after you left? No, not when we moved or when I moved out on my own. Yeah, we're done with it. Good call. Take nothing from the house that came with it. That's what we did. The house was sold as a flipper a few months after. My research shows that they had to sit on the house and ended up losing it to the bank. It was then sold to the current owner. I understand that my cousins are providing me this information, but I believe them. The detail they both provided was far too similar to my own experience. Some parts of it I didn't tell them about. I'm also not surprised that using the Ouija board provoked it. This would be the last time that I spoke with my cousins about the house. They are alive and well, and want nothing more to do with the house or to even talk about it anymore. But my experiences do not end here. I recently got in contact with the current owner.
Present day. My initial contact. I reached out via snail mail to the current owners of the house. Here is the letter. Hello, this will likely be the most bizarre note you will receive. When I was a kid, I grew up on the second floor of this house. I've included a printout of the layout of the second floor. The house was once a funeral home, and I'm writing because I have been sharing my experiences with strangers, and it's really awoken in my sense of responsibility about this house. I'll be blunt, this house has a dark entity in it. I know this will sound crazy, but I've seen it. I lived in terror of it for years. I was terrorized by it, physically assaulted, and I believe it went as far as to oppress my family. The basement is unnerving. Have any children? Started to have an imaginary friend, the old man. Here's an email address where you can respond if you want. Please forgive the lack of identification or return address, but I've learned to be weary of anything physically coming from the house. A few days later, the email address gets a hit. Current owners. OP, you're not crazy. We have seen it too. Your letter arrived, and I admit, my partner and I were very skeptical, but you captured the layout of the upper floor perfectly. It's odd that we actually took comfort from knowing we are not going crazy. We moved in about 8 or 9 months ago. The house was undervalued for its size, so we thought we got a good deal. Being non-essential workers, we are both quarantined at home, and it feels like something is drawing on the fear and uncertainty. My partner believes she has a gift, and the night after we closed on the house, she couldn't sleep. She said we made a mistake and that something was waiting for us in this new house. I was always skeptical about the paranormal, but lately I'm thinking there is more to this world. We moved in. On the first day, the home stunk of rotten eggs, and it would go away and return. When not smelling like eggs, it was like compost. It was so strange. Our cat will hiss and growl in the middle of the night, and we will find her gaze locked on the door to the basement or some random corner. We hear the footsteps on the second floor, but no one is renting the apartment. We called the police, once convinced someone was up there. They heard the steps and started an investigation. The doors and windows were locked. No one was up there. One day, we saw a figure, a good 7 foot, taking up the whole window frame of what was your bedroom window as I was gardening. It appeared to be watching us. My partner tried to get a picture of it on her phone, but the file corrupted. You mentioned an old man. I had a long pause right there. My partner and I don't have any children, but we do have a nephew. He's been going on now about the old man that talks to him in his playroom. The room is the one directly under your old bedroom. My partner has studied Reiki and is trying to push positive energy into the home to force out the negative, but so far has had no luck. Thank you for reaching out. Can we continue to talk about this? My response. Hello. Of course we can. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. The house, sadly, has seen little positive emotions to leave a positive feeling. The current time doesn't have enough positive energy either. The entity loves darker emotions, fear, anger. We had some temporary luck with blessings, but something would always embolden the entity. The entity seems to be bound to the house or land, so you can usually catch a reprieve if you need to by just going away. I recommend that when things get bad. I actually would say just get away, but I know you can't.
whatever you do, don't try to communicate with it. End post. So it's about this time that a string of very bad luck befell me. 1. A bat entered my home. No windows open, no screens missing, no entrance from the attic. No idea how it got in. 2. My coffee mug shattered in my hand at work. No stitches, just a minor burn. 3. Issues with my heart. I, like my father, uncle and grandfather, have an aortic aneurysm, and any change to my heartbeat I'm hyper aware of. 4. On a visit to the cardiologist to review the growth of the aneurysm, a car accident shut down the main road, and I found myself on an all too familiar road. I had not seen it for 30 years, but there it was, and I was stopped in front of it. My heart started beating out of sync, and my left arm burned. When I got to the cardiologist, a long red line was down my left arm. I still hate that house. In 1998, I was 16 and attending a public high school in Newcastle, New South Wales. It was built in the mid-1900s, so that made the original buildings the oldest I have ever spent much time in. I had a good group of friends. Some I had known since I was 3 years old. The unit we were doing in English required us to go off in groups to work. The teacher sent us to an empty classroom a fair way down the hall. For some reason, at this time of the day, there weren't many classes on that floor. Our work was finished quickly. One of my friends, Crystal, said, "Would you guys like to try playing a Ouija board?" We were all into it. Now, it's not like she carried a board around in her backpack or anything like that. We pulled a lined piece of paper from an exercise book and wrote letters, numbers, good, bad, and hello and goodbye. The planchette was to be one of our rings. Being teenage girls, we had a few each. So here we are, myself, Crystal, Ruby and Amy, playing Ouija in the English block. I have to admit, I was a little concerned that the teacher would walk in and be annoyed with us. But as the weeks went by, this proved to never be an issue. Crystal was the host. She ran the show. She knew the rules and we followed her lead. We would place the ring in the middle of the board and she would ask if there was anyone who wanted to talk to us. We would always become engaged. Sometimes the movements were very slow and answers would take a long time to come out. Other times it was quicker and more fluid. If the ring did anything weird, like move between letters over and over, or drew a shape like a circle or figure eight, she would get us to move the ring to goodbye. We would ask stuff like, "When did you die?" and "How did you die?" Often, the answer to "How did you die?" would be murder. We probably did this every week over a term, so there was probably about 10 sessions. Crystal used Ouija on her own. According to her, she had met a spirit guide through the board. I'm going to call him Tommy. For the first 6 weeks or so, we didn't know about Tommy, but towards the end, he began to make appearances on the board. He would basically hijack the sessions. It was kind of amusing. We would know he had taken over by the sheer number of spelling mistakes he would make. Apparently, he was dyslexic. We would be getting coherent answers and mid-sentence, the words would be misspelt. Crystal would say, "Is that you, Tommy?" And the answer would be yes. She would push the ring to goodbye. I remember one time in particular when the ring was moving really fast and purposefully, and then Tommy took over. I will never know if he was being protective or possessive. I live in a one-bedroom house, built in the 40s. I started noticing 2 dark human forms passing by the bedroom door
after my boyfriend at the time went to bed. Even with the lights off and just TV on, I could see them. I've seen ghosts since I was young, so I noticed but didn't freak out. It kept occurring. I started having major stomach pains for no reason. I have a psychic friend who was doing a reading to see if she could help me. Having grown up on the same street as I live on, she knew some of the history. Before my house was built and the house next door, a colonial woman must have suffered from postpartum depression. She placed her baby in the middle of a quilt and lit it afire. Of course, the baby died. Her husband was so distressed, he killed her then himself. How horrible. Well, my spirits were the husband and the wife. The wife loved that I possessed a maturing mothering instinct and wanted to be me. She was trying to jump into my body, but I'm very strong-willed, and she couldn't, so I was having severe pain from fighting her. My friend never told me what to do, but I knew what to try. Alone one night with just my dogs, I cut off all the lights and TV, and then lit a white candle. I sat down and talked to both of them, just like they were alive. I told them that God is a forgiving God, and all they had to do was ask for forgiveness. I told them that their baby was waiting on them in heaven. I told them it was time that they forgave themselves and each other, and that their days on earth were over. I pointed to the candle flame and told them that all they had to do was go to the light. I was never scared, but acted like someone giving them advice. All of a sudden the house felt lighter. Never seen them ever again, and the severe stomach pains went away. It felt great to help them cross over. I feel like if I ever have to do it again, I have the strength and know how to help. I've also seen a teenage girl across the street, dressed in cotton dress down to her ankles. She's beautiful, but never bothers me. I wish I knew her story and could help her. Blessed be. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe that there are beings that exist outside of our physical existence. Although I've been back and forth in my belief that there is a benevolent God, every time that I've been in the grasps of an evil presence, I find that calling upon the Lord's name would always make the evil presence disappear. I haven't had very many supernatural experiences in my life, but when they do happen, I don't forget them. A few years ago, my family moved to a fairly new house. At the time, I was in college, so I would only visit them during breaks, but during the summer of 2015, I stayed with them for about 2.5 months. Since I didn't have a car, and my mum was essentially always at work, my younger siblings and I were stuck in the house. I tried to make the best of it though, by finding a movie for us to watch almost every night, most of them being horror. I'd say that everything was fine for the first few weeks that I was there, but then things started getting slightly weird. One night, while I was scrolling through social media, I heard my stepdad come back from work and shuffle around the kitchen while he was on the phone. I walked downstairs to greet him and he wasn't there. I stood in the living room dumbfounded. I mean, where was he? I just heard him on the phone. A few minutes later, I hear the door unlocking, only to see my stepdad walking in. "Were you inside a few minutes ago?" I asked. "No, I just got in," he says. "Did you walk in and then walk out?" He shakes his head no. I was so confused. My stepdad is an alcoholic and comes home either tipsy or drunk most nights, so I figured maybe he had a few drinks and just forgot that he was just in the house. But looking back, he seemed pretty sober and coherent that night. Just a few days after that incident, it happened again.
I heard what sounded like my mum and sister coming back from the grocery store. I could literally hear their voices. I went downstairs to help them out, and once again, they weren't there. I started to question whether I was becoming detached from reality or not. I've never heard voices before. I shared this with my sister, who expressed to me that she too was experiencing something similar. She said that there have been times when she thought she heard me or our younger brother talking, only for us to not even be there. The thought that something was imitating my voice made me feel very uneasy. I've heard stories before of people thinking they heard a family member or friend calling their name. I've been told that, in those instances, it is a demon who is looking for an invitation. But what exactly is the purpose of imitating a conversation? The weirdest moment I experienced in that house happened one night as I was falling asleep. I was in this half asleep, half awake state, kind of like an in-between where I could feel myself drifting. Suddenly, I began to hear a man shouting in my ear. I don't remember what it said, but I woke up fully expecting to see a person in my room. But there was no one. After that night, I spent a few days looking up what could be the cause of this. I stumbled upon a Christian forum where I talked about this specific experience and was told that it was for sure a demon trying to mess with me. On the other hand, I found websites that described this event as a normal, physiological occurrence. Although I do believe that many things can have scientific reasoning, I also believe that sometimes there are otherworldly things at play. The most notable incident happened the night before I was supposed to move out of my dorm. As I slept on my side, it felt like I was being pushed, like something was trying to roll me onto my stomach. But because I knew it wasn't an actual person, I didn't care and continued to sleep. The morning after, as my family was helping me pack up, I started to feel this burning sensation below my left shoulder. I asked my sister to take a look, and she told me that there were 3 long scratch marks. I thought maybe I had scratched myself while I was unconscious, but given that there were 3 marks, and I felt myself being pushed, I knew it was from something that did not mean well. In a separate experience I had, I fell asleep on the couch in my family's newest house, only to find myself in that dreadful state of not being able to move. Some people say that sleep paralysis feels like someone is pushing you down. For me, it feels like a vibration all through my body, almost as if whatever it is made up of some buzzing vibrational energy. I tried so hard to open my eyes, to speak, to move, until I finally found the strength to say Jesus. Just as I said it, I could hear ice from the dispenser in the kitchen drop loudly, and I was able to open my eyes. Instead of feeling afraid, something told me that the sound of the ice falling symbolized the spirit being ripped out of the house. I have my theories as to why these things happen, but I'm interested to hear from others as to what they think is the reason for these eerie events. Several days prior to my bout with sleep paralysis, I had a physical altercation with my partner at the time, after he struck me in the throat because he didn't like how I was washing the dishes. I hate fighting, and I've never hit anyone, but when he struck me in the throat, I sort of lost it and subdued him. I didn't harm him, but he decided to leave, and as he was getting his things, he kept saying how I would regret it. At the time, I didn't know what he meant, but I soon found out. It's hard to know if I was asleep or awake when all this happened. In my mind, I was awake, but it's possible I was not. The first occurrence began by me hearing someone enter the apartment and then walk into the kitchen and throw their keys onto the island there. The door to my bedroom was open about 6 inches, and I saw the door move as though something came through it.
and then whatever it was jumped onto my bed. I could see nothing, but it felt like there was a small, invisible dog on my bed, running back and forth. Once I could move, I reached out and tried to touch it or catch it, but I couldn't. I could only feel it running back and forth, and it eventually went completely around me on the bed. I then laid down and put the comforter over my head, and whatever this was began running around my head. It was almost like a playful dog or puppy. I don't know if I went back to sleep or it disappeared, but this was the first occurrence. A few nights later, I awoke to an old woman sitting on the opposite corner of my bed. She was heavy set, but old and wrinkly, with a babushka tied around her neck. She had her arms crossed over her stomach, and she stared at me with an emotionless expression. I asked her very sternly, "What do you want?" To which she said nothing and continued to stare at me. Telepathically, she made me aware that she could come no closer, due to the blessed crucifix I had over my headboard, as she glanced at it very quickly. I have no recollection of what happened after this. The last occurrence, I woke up laying on my stomach and looking at the wall. I sensed that there was something in the opposite corner of the room. Whatever it was in the corner caused a feeling of terror in me I have never felt before or since. The energy I felt in the corner projected complete terror and contempt for me. I knew the only way I could make this end was to call on God's protection. I don't know how long I laid there in terror, but after a while I decided to jump out of bed with my eyes closed and turn the light on, then feel around for my Bible, which was under the head of my bed. Once I had the Bible, I found Psalm 91 and began to read it aloud. Once I had the light on, I sensed that whatever had been in the corner was now in the spare room, in the darkness. So holding the Bible, I reached in and turned the light on. I also read the prayer to invoke St. Michael's protection. Once I prayed and read this aloud, the evil was gone. For 2 weeks after this night, I prayed and read Psalm 91 and the St. Michael prayer aloud in my room, every night before bed. For the rest of my time there, I never experienced anything, and haven't had it once at my new house, which I dedicated to St. Michael the day I moved in. I believe my partner, who dabbled in witchcraft, somehow sent these spirits to me in revenge for the fight we had, where he moved out. I would implore anyone experiencing sleep paralysis or anything like it to read Psalm 91 aloud in your room or house. Whatever these spirits are which cause these bouts of terror, leave you alone once you call on God for help.
I am a big fan of scary stories, and yes, I do believe in paranormal happenings. I believe my strong, courageous ancestors watch over my family, friends, and myself. I'm writing this story, as so many of your stories have inspired me to tell my true tale, and I thank you for that. This happened to me and my shelter dog, Scooby, in our small, interesting apartment area. There is quite a disturbing history of past and present tenants that definitely make you aware of your surroundings and the actions of your neighbors. The negative attitudes, hypocrisy, and numerous shootings, escapees hunted down by helicopters, flying low, constantly overhead circling the buildings, I feel equally attracts an equally negative ambience here in this particular apartment complex. There have been murders, break-ins, assaults, and I can't wait to move out when our lease is up. The often dangerous ambience was a huge reason we found our dog, and he found us. We protect and care for each other. Scooby was homeless for a while, we were told, and a bit cautious of humans. We've never looked back. We knew when we first met him at this shelter, we were a family, and I couldn't be happier. He's a gift. I love this dog, and I'm blessed to be his human.
Also, this state is renowned for its rich history of a frequently visiting melee of past supernatural residents. Gangsters, hustlers, murderers, slaves and their owners, gold diggers and miners, and so much more. Mostly due to the love of money and it being the root of all evil. Since I'm planning on, as they say, getting out of Dodge, here is my story of my and my amazing dog Scooby's encounter with a real shadow person. One warm summer evening, around 10:30 at night, I decided to fix a sandwich while I watched my favorite YouTube channel. Turning on the small kitchen light to help me see in the fridge, I noticed my small pet's intense body language, tuned into something I could not yet see. He was seriously focused, his head and eyes following, slowly, intently. Eyes alert, squarely focused, and moving into the kitchen. On the white, blank wall, just a few feet from the two of us. As alert and on point as he was, Scooby was not agitated, like we were in danger of any kind. My eyes, however, were huge, heart pounding, my breath caught in my throat, not believing my own eyes, as the tall, thin, definitely scary and creepy shadow person continued on, passing slowly by, seemingly aware of us as we were of it. It moved leisurely and smoothly by us, not caring that we saw it, just inches from the both of us, then finally disappearing into the wall of the neighboring apartment. All was silent, and hopefully this eerie figure was just passing through my neighbor's place too. Like a supernatural shortcut of sorts, perhaps. Scooby's intense, protective yet sensitive reaction to our thankfully non-threatening shadowy guest confirmed what I would have doubted my own eyes seeing. Scooby's sensitive, perceptive, this validation enables me to confidently submit and tell my story about a real and rather frightening encounter with a shadow figure. We haven't seen it since, and happily so, but I know I'm safe with Scooby, and he is safe with me. I'm just thankful our dark, unknown, shadowy, uninvited guest didn't stop and wait around for me to make it a sandwich. I am a very nearly 40-year-old female. In my life, I worked as a teen, and then only recently took on work again. I spent the time in between raising my 5 kids. It has been worth every second, and now it is time for me to earn some money. So I work at a nut processing plant. I am a sorter. My job is to get rid of the bad nuts. My experiences have occurred on the main line. Often, the nuts come out of the silo, get cracked, and then come past us. There is a conveyor belt above us and one below us. We stand or sit at one of the 6 tables in the middle of these. Generally, we do a 2-hour session and then have a small break. The tables are numbered and we move forward a table each day. What I am about to describe happened on table 5. Now, I'm just reporting my experience. It's up to you whether you believe me or not. You may want to call the mental health team, and if you do, I won't even put up a fight. The first thing happened when I had only been working for 2 weeks. I was on table 5 with an older lady who no longer works there. I was on the side with the belt above us. Past my co-worker is a walkway, windows, and the external lunch area. We are working away. My shift starts at 6 a.m. This occurred around 7 a.m. Out of the corner of my eye, I notice someone watching us. My predator response is subtle, so I think it's weird that my foreman is standing there with his arms folded across his chest. And I think to myself, if I ignore him, he'll probably go away. I continue to sort. A minute later, as per what I do if I think I'm being observed but don't want the person to know I know, I checked my peripheral again. That creep is still there. Now I'm annoyed. I turn to give him a dirty look, and there is nothing there. I look out, and directly in line behind where I thought the foreman was, is a really old tree. Okay, I think, and keep working. I check my peripheral again later, and see the same thing. A male, average height, wearing a hard hat with earmuffs attached, and a high-vis vest, standing facing us, with his arms crossed. I look directly again, and, of course, there is nothing there. So I say to myself, there's nothing there. I now know that my foreman would never stand there like that. The factory has cameras, so if we are to be observed, that is how it is done. Also, my foreman never wears a vest. He has his uniform shirt. All was normal for a few weeks. I wondered if there was something about the tree. It looked like it could have been there as long or longer than the factory. I wondered if I should bless it. But then I thought, what if it's demonic? I don't want to piss anything off. If I'm on a table by myself, I'll end up singing, so I count that as an indirect blessing. No person would be able to hear me underneath the industrial white noise. I like to think I'm sending out good vibrations. I ended up on that table with an experienced worker again. She was wearing a yellow high-vis hoodie, with the hood down. Out of the corner of my eye, I think I can see something, standing next to and a little beyond my coworker. It is curled into her, hiding but just visible. I look, because that is so strange, and it creeped me out. When I look directly, there is absolutely only one person next to me, and I think, oh, it's her hood down, making me think there is a head near hers. What I saw was the same color as her hoodie. A couple of minutes later, it happens again. I repeat what I had done previously, and tell myself nothing is there, and continue my day without further incident. Now to most recently, since two things had happened on my table, I should point out that I worked that spot alone many times with no weirdness. I had become weary of it. This day I was working with a girl newer than me. This meant that I was on the other end of the table, next to the walkway. I thought maybe I had figured this out, so I turned myself toward my coworker, facing away from the windows and tree. New girl, of course, had a new uniform. She's sitting next to me, working hard. Underneath her chair, just next to her, is a pair of legs with the exact same color of pants. Again, I do a slow double take and end up telling myself there is nothing there. I worked in a different section today, still sorting, but out of a bin. This section is quieter and the sorting is done slower. It's a nice, relaxed pace. I was paired with another worker. We got to talking and the subject turned to the paranormal. This person has some stories. So I shared what I had been through. They said, put a pin in the first one because I have seen the same thing. So it was nice that someone could correlate with me, same description, but unsure of the exact spot said thing was witnessed. Apparently the factory is haunted, but most experiences happen deeper in the section we were in. Perhaps I will get to work with her again today. If so, I may have an update in the future. I've included a photo of the tree. If anyone gets any feels from it, can you please leave a comment? I'd love any feedback. My first experience with a Ouija board was in the 5th or 6th grade and belonged to a friend of mine named Ashley. He brought it to school and we played it in the gym, in the dark area under the seats. I can't remember all of the questions that we asked, but I was fascinated because the planchette was obviously moving on its own. I remember we played it on a Tuesday, and the following Friday was my friend Heidi's birthday party. Ashley was there with his Ouija board, and we played it on the floor of the living room. I had brought my blessed crucifix I had purchased at a St. Elizabeth's Catholic Church in Eureka Springs, Arkansas.
because I had told my mum about us playing the board at school and she told me not to play it, and that they were demonic. To see if they were demonic or not, I brought the crucifix, and after we had played it for a while, I laid the crucifix on it. To all our amazement, the board would not work the entire rest of the night. We tried to play it several times, and even brought it outside to the barn, and it would not work. Years later, I got a beautiful piece of wood from a friend of my mum's, and I made a Ouija board from it. I painted the letters and numbers, and also the sun and the moon. I put so much lacquer on it that it looked like it had a layer of glass over it. I also made the planchette from a thin piece of plywood and used felt on the pegs to make it slide easier. As beautiful as it was, it never once worked for me in all the years I had it. I let some friends borrow it once, and they said it worked all night for them, which I didn't believe. My friends, Heidi and Dwayne, shared my passion for creepy and paranormal stuff, so we decided to take the Ouija board and a game like a Ouija board I had purchased called a psychic circle to an abandoned cemetery in the woods across from my grandmother's house. This cemetery is the ultimate in creepy because it is at the top of a hill, surrounded by woods and a rundown iron fence. No one has been buried there since the 1940s, and a lady buried there is named Julia Roberts, which we always thought was funny. We lit our candles and tried the Ouija board, which, as usual, didn't work. Since it didn't work, we decided to use it as the base for the psychic circle because it was the type of board that folds out. Once we had it set up and began asking questions, the planchette of the psychic circle game, which was a clear round piece of plastic, would move, but it moved very, very slow. So slow that I thought they were moving it somehow. I can't remember how many questions we asked or what questions, just that it moved very slowly. Because I thought they were moving it, I decided to ask a question only I knew the answer to. So I decided to ask it, what was the first letter in the name of my ancestor who was a messenger in the Civil War? Immediately after I asked it, the planchette went directly to the letter S. It moved on its own and out from under our fingers very quickly. My ancestor's name was Sylvester. Being that this thing had moved on its own, we grabbed up the boards and immediately left the cemetery. Walking back to our car, I told them the letter S was correct, and we never played either game again. I kept the Ouija board for many years, but wouldn't bring it inside the house. Many times a friend or roommate would bring it inside for whatever reason. It was weird because it was as if the board wanted to be inside, and several times we needed something to have as a flat surface, and the board was always the first thing we grabbed. One day, the wires on our love seat had broken, and my partner had used the board to support the corner of the cushion. I had only just put it back outside, and it was as if it had a mind of its own and got back in. I'm not saying the board was responsible for the love seat breaking, but had it not, it wouldn't have been brought back inside. I decided to demolish the board, so I borrowed an axe from a friend and chopped it into 4 pieces, which wasn't easy, given all the lacquer I had put on it. Last year I bought an old Ouija board at a flea market for $5, with the intention of burning it, so some dumb kids wouldn't play it, thinking it's a game and end up contacting a demon. I was told not to burn it because that would possibly release any spirits attached to it. I emailed Father Gary Thomas, who the movie The Rite with Sir Anthony Hopkins is based on, to ask what I should do with it. He told me he knew of several people who had tried to burn them but couldn't. He suggested I break it into as many pieces as I could and either throw it away or bury it, so I broke it and threw it away. To anyone who plays one and thinks they've contacted Grandma, please keep in mind that evil spirits know everything your grandma would know, and would pretend to be her just to reel you in.